Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can scratch. With this AI, like scratching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way. And welcome again. Another Thursday.
Talking
There you go.
shit with Glenn and Tony. Kind of
Happy
sticks.
Thursday. It does. It does. It's an earworm, man.
I guess it was just
Very
meant to be that way.
just meant to be. Every single week, right here with us, talking stuff about things. And tonight, we're going to be talking about things like composers and arrangers and producers,
Songwriters.
songwriters, orchestrators, all that stuff.
Yeah, and
So,
chances
a whole
are
bunch lined up.
all of you are one of or multiple of these things.
Multiples. More than one of the above, yes.
Yeah, as we
That is a
look,
valid answer.
you should see like which
Mhm.
ones you are, because we're gonna actually look at like the differences between
Mhm.
you know what an arranger is versus a composer. A lot of times people think that you know they're the same thing. They're not,
Mhm. Yep.
and we're going to start with the differences of composers, arrangers, orchestrators, and conductors, because
Mhm.
those are really more the traditional the orchestra musicians. But
Mhm.
as we go along, uh, we're going to go more in depth into what an arranger is, air gigs. A
Mhm. Yep.
couple of new channels here. I always manage to
Nice,
find
nice.
a couple of freshies each week.
Absolutely. That's what we love about having a feed built the way we did.
Oh, and I couldn't resist this one because I've been
Nice.
really trying to like learn the secret sauce of good horn arrangements. And
Mhm.
since we're covering arranging, uh, the Modern Music Arranger, killer channel.
Mhm.
He's gonna show like how to do a four-piece horn section voicing, which you know, trumpet, saxophone, trombone, and what was the fourth one?
Probably a second sax, either higher or lower.
Oh,
Yeah.
baritone sax.
Mhm.
So I'm
Nice.
really interested in that one because that's one I've
Mhm.
been spending a lot of time trying to learn.
Nice. Yeah, because I mean, you get the horns right, and the rest is gravy. One of the things a lot of people will do if they're trying to songwrite and it's just songwriting and just abstractly doing horns on a keyboard or whatever is they'll try to put the horn part throughout the entire song, and that's one of the big no-nos is that with a horn part it comes and it goes. Like they have points where they come in and add and embellish to that spot, and then they back off,
Yeah,
and then they come in and they back
when
off.
it's done right, you get to appreciate each instrument in its own
Oh yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
this girl, she
Not so.
one way or another, I can almost always find she is like the modern musical source on YouTube for just everything about music. She's
And she can play.
all over the place. And for this one, she's going to talk about like the one thing that, all great composers have in common. And it's a really good point that she focuses on, which is crystallization. uh,
Nice.
the the ability to take all those different instruments and bring them together.
In a cohesive way.
Yeah. And she's so good at explaining it that I couldn't resist
Yeah.
that one.
Very cool.
And,
Very cool.
and hey, since we're talking composers, Composing Academy, he's going to show how to compose for cinematic music, which
Mhm.
a lot of composers these days. This is the go-to for composers. Video games and
Mhm.
film and TV. It's really where it's at for a composer.
And even just understanding how the music in those places works, then every movie you watch, every video game, every commercial, you actually start paying attention to the little things that you learn about composing in those ways, and you start to recognize those things in the music that you listen to every day.
Yeah.
And recognizing those techniques help you to now use those techniques and build them into your music and into your sound.
Yeah, and with your now arrangement,
Mhm.
composing gets all that full. He does.
Oh yeah.
He will be talking about some, important things to consider, like whether you're composing a song for a soundtrack or whether you're the actual score. you know, that's why I really like this one, because he gets into the difference between like somebody who's scoring the soundtrack
Hmm.
versus someone who's writing that song for that moment.
Right. Exactly.
Good stuff.
Hmm.
And then we're going to kind of slide and look at the difference between a composer and a songwriter. And again, people might think these are the same thing, and they're not exactly. A songwriter, which is probably what most everybody who's watching is, this is the category where we fit the most.
Hmm.
And that
Indeed.
comes another one that's film centric, film music mentor.
Hmm. Nice.
And then we're going to slide into some songwriting mentality. And this is a channel that we've brought up a couple of times. Couldn't resist it if I'm going to have a songwriting section, because I really
Hmm.
love this channel. Their information is phenomenal, how to write songs. They
Hmm.
have a great dynamic and awesome tips.
And starting with the enemy of good songwriting. I like it.
Yeah. What she talks about here is like, you know, the things that can get in the way of
Hmm.
good songwriting.
Oh yeah,
And you probably recognize this guy too, because you know,
I
a
do.
couple of guitar nights, and I was like, as I'm looking through these, I was like, oh, the sensei
Hmm.
covered songwriting. Fuck yes. I was, and I,
Yeah.
again, this one is chock full of great, unique songwriting tips. I was really surprised at the things he covers. There's a lot of good tips in here when you're trying to figure out how to flesh out that song, and you guys will like this one. That comes from Samurai Guitarist.
Yeah. Excellent channel there as well.
Yeah, and here's a new one, Steve Gutenberg, Audiophiliac. It's like an audio maniac, and
Yeah.
you know, this is going to shift into what a producer actually does and how a producer
Hmm.
fits into all of these roles. And some of us actually play multiple roles. Like, you can be a songwriter and a producer.
Hmm.
Nowadays it's becoming more common.
Exactly. Wear multiple hats. You got to have a big hat rack.
Yeah,
Doing the stuff by yourself today.
well, you got to have a big hat if you're you.
That's true.
And this one comes actually from the CEO of Discmaker. You're probably, from us old schoolers, like, we remember Discmaker, and Discmaker's still, you know, out there, and they're like DistroKid. They're competitors in that sense of distribution of music. And he's going to talk about like the way that they score points for
Hmm.
production, and production score, I think, is what he calls it, production points.
Sure.
Really interesting stuff. And it's the producer versus the engineer versus the executive producer. These are all different shoes that get worn in the back room.
Mhm. Yep. Good to see a peek behind the curtain there for sure.
Yeah. And our last one, he's another one that's popped up a couple of times when we've done some of the MIDI stuff and beat making. Tatro,
Yep.
awesome channel, just covers all sorts of stuff. And he's going to give some advice on, you know, when, if you're starting out as a music producer. And again, his tips are gold for starting out.
Yeah. Nice. So we're going to cover a lot of different aspects of making your music, and the different hats that you wear when you're making your music, and different different things to watch out for, the enemy of songwriting, all that stuff. So we've got a bunch of different things coming up.
Yeah, actually, I like his hat too.
There you go. It's a hat night. I'll see if I can find a hat around here somewhere.
Oh, it's too bad you got rid of that Stetson.
Yeah. Had to return it to its rightful owner, man. Once we figured out whose it was. Got to get that hat back to home. Because what if it had been my hat that was somewhere and someone found it? I would want them to return it to me, right?
There was, especially,
That's
yeah, a nice one like that.
right, exactly. Nice black Stetson. It was good stuff.
So this first one, Elon or Elon Osborne,
Mhm.
at Elon Osborne on YouTube. and this was a new channel for me.
Yeah, me too.
And the reason why I picked this one, especially to start out, is because it gets us warmed up for like these different roles of music making that we're looking at. And I like that he included orchestrator and conductor, because that's one I kind of wanted to put into the whole of the topics, but it's kind of hard to, you know, cover conductors and orchestrators when you start getting into the other, like songwriting and things like that. Some orchestra musicians, they are one thing and that's it. And his video covers the gamut as far as composing, arranging, orchestrating, and conducting, and what the roles of these different things are.
And some people look at a conductor and they're like, hey, he doesn't even have an instrument. He's not making any noise up there. You know, he's not doing anything. And it's like, well, he's playing the band. I mean, he's, you know, he's the one who like turns up that one a little bit. He's the one who turns that one down a little bit, speeds things up a little, slows things down. Like he's got to be the overall traffic cop, getting the entire piece out in the way that he sees it.
Yeah, the great conductors are the metronome. They are the massagers of this section, that section. They lead that orchestra along, and to the audience,
they want more from over there. More.
Yeah, you see their expression. The audience relates to that conductor.
Exactly. So that was always one of my favorite things to do, is watch the conductor when I'm at an orchestra, and also like look at the individual parts and try to figure out, like, if somebody's soloing, I'm trying to, like, you know, find them in the crowd. Oh, there's the one, their hand's moving a little different than the others.
Yeah, it's the job I always wanted, but it's a lot harder than I thought.
Oh yeah. But what are the differences between composer, arranger, orchestrator, and conductor?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Composer, arranger, orchestrator, conductor. What's the diff? Rinse. Hello, I'm Elon Osborne, and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about movies, audio, and music. But more specifically, we'll be talking about a music-related subject that I know so many people have been waiting with bated breath for me to talk about. I mean, look at this Twitter tweet from the Music Goose that reads, @Elon Osborne. Can you please make a video about the difference between a composer, arranger, orchestrator, and conductor? I is honk fused. Thank you, Music Goose, for such a wonderful question that I myself have to go and Google real quick just to make sure I know the difference between the four. And by the way, don't even think about searching for the Music Goose, because you know what happens when you go to Twitter and you type in @music honk honk into the search bar? No results! And you know why? Cause I made it all up. That's right. I spent an extremely long 5 minutes Googling an Adobe Illustrator template for a mock Twitter post, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I did it the old-fashioned way, and I created a Twitter post mock-up myself, which I can now use for future videos. You see, I take 30 minutes out of my day to fabricate something that only has 5 seconds of screen time for you. I do it for you, people of YouTube.
But why?
So now that you only wish there was a Twitter handle @music honk honk that actually existed, and that there was an accompanying t-shirt, or maybe, just maybe, the t-shirt does exist? Could a link be in the description below? I don't know. Composer. So you want to be a composer, eh?
No.
Okay then, what is a composer exactly?
I don't know, you tell me.
Think of it this way. A composer starts with a blank canvas. No notes written, no melody, just... From nothing, a composer creates something. Steven Spielberg asked John Williams to compose a score for him. John Williams is sent a rough cut of the film with usually maybe some dialogue and sparse sound effects thrown in maybe. But normally it's just a real rough cut version of the film. From nothing, John Williams writes melodies that will be remembered for generations to come. And speaking of the film industry, sometimes a director will send a rough cut of the movie to the composer, which actually has temp scores in the various cues that they want, just to give the composer an idea of the type of music that he wants in a particular part of the movie, or the genre or the feel, etc. Now, depending on the project, being a composer means you might just write the melody of the music and that's it. Or in the case of composers in the days of yore, like Beethoven, Mozart, Wagner, etc., they did everything. They wrote the melodies, they wrote the harmonies, they wrote which instrument in the orchestra would play which part, everything. But that's over.
Nope.
Over.
Uh-uh.
Roger.
Not that either.
But that's overlapping into some of the other jobs that I'll be getting into in this video. So, without further ado, next up is arranger. So a composer makes something from nothing, right?
Right.
Well, an arranger makes something from something that already exists. Take this sheet music one can purchase for AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long. Obviously, this piece wasn't originally written for a string quartet. Then why is it available to download for strings? What sorcery is this? Because it has been arranged for a string quartet by Bojana Jovanovic. He took a song that already existed and he rearranged it to be played by 4 stringed instruments. That makes me wonder what it would sound like if you arranged the same song for 4 tubas. Yeah, that sounds about right. Most arrangers know how to read and write music, have a great knowledge of music theory, and are multi-instrumentalists. They also know how to do harmony.
Sure.
They also know how to do harmony, composition, and orchestration. And they usually have their own studio equipped with
A popcorn machine.
computers, software, plugins, microphones, synthesizers, the works. Another example is your good old band leader from high school or college who wants you to perform a 9 Inch Nails song on the football field with the whole marching band. The sheet music for The Hand That Feeds you can purchase for $70 thanks to Tom Wallace, who arranged it for a marching band. I bet every member of that marching band that year got laid so much.
Yeah, right.
So what are your hobbies? What do you do?
I'm in the marching band.
Ew, gross. Pancakes are so disgusting.
Yeah, well, we're playing 9 Inch Nails this year, so whatevs, no biggie.
Is this starting to make sense now? An arranger might also be asked to speed up or slow down the tempo of a song, strip down and reduce the amount of instruments playing a song, or beef up the performance with even
More beef?
even more instruments playing than the original composition. Speaking of stripping down, Dan Coates is one of Alfred Music's most prolific authors, having taken Broadway tunes, rock songs, film scores, and reduced them down to just being able to play them on the piano at all various skill levels. Think about that for a second. Not only might an arranger strip down to something to be played on piano only, but they also might be asked to write for multiple skill levels from beginning to expert. A song
Of Ice and Fire.
and also remixes fall under the arranger category. Arranging can not only mean speeding up or slowing down a song, beefing up or stripping down, but it can also mean reimagining a song altogether. So, you know, like DJs. Wow, I love your remix of the Neverending Story theme. You're my favorite DJ. I prefer the term electronic arranger. Making or reinventing something from something that already exists. Moving on, orchestrator. In this category, we're dealing with 2 camps. Orchestrator for concert and stage, and orchestrator for TV and film. Let's start with orchestrator for concert and stage. Mainly performances that are live, done by real people with real instruments. Similar to an arranger, an orchestrator does
Calisthenics.
Similar to an arranger, the orchestrator makes something from something that already exists. But the key difference is, while the arranger reimagines something. Hey, Klaus Doldinger, composer of the music for the Neverending Story. Yeah? You dig my remix of your sick theme? 9. The orchestrator develops, enhances, or completes a piece of music, sticking very closely to the original composer's intention. And specifically talking about concert and stage, the orchestrator is very familiar with how an orchestra works, taking the composer's melody or watered down score and expanding it to a full orchestral score, determining the number of musicians in each section, strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, the registers in which each instrument plays, and balances the dynamics of the orchestra to achieve the desired effect of the composer. Speaking of dynamics, this might happen between a composer and an orchestrator. This part is supposed to be loud, so that's when like everybody in the whole orchestra plays at the same time, right? No, that's not how an orchestra works. Or this scenario might come up concerning the manner in which the performers are playing their instruments. Yeah, I was thinking the woodwinds would do this like 16th note staccato riff for like 16 bars, while the French horns and trombones would just hold out their notes for those same 16 bars? Oh, so you want the woodwinds and brass to pass out, is that it? Wait, what? So what about TV and film orchestrators? You can't talk about the modern day orchestrator without talking about MIDI, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. With the ease of using musical software these days, composers will write a score using orchestral sample libraries and the use of MIDI notation. Orchestral sample library? Yeah, dude!
Language, geez.
Sample libraries are usually hundreds of gigabytes worth of actual samples of recorded instruments being played, then loaded into software patches, which can then be played by a MIDI keyboard. I personally use East West's Hollywood Orchestra sample library. They are not a sponsor. I bought this with my own money many years ago. So there.
Fine.
So these days, TV and film orchestrators receive a MIDI score from a composer, complete with assigned instruments and when and where they will be playing, as well as an MP3 or WAV file, so the orchestrator knows how it should sound when it's complete. The orchestrator then takes these two sources and works it out into a full-fledged working score that can be played by actual musicians on stage. But only if the project has a big enough budget to allow live recordings of that score to be played by real musicians. But what if they don't have the budget? Well, here's a little subcategory of TV and film orchestrators.
MIDI orchestrator.
Since sample libraries sound eerily close to the real thing nowadays, projects that don't have the budget, like many TV shows, will have the score be only synthesized. In this case, the MIDI orchestrator still receives a MIDI score and an MP3 from the composer, but then using their knowledge of how an orchestra actually works, they then retool the MIDI score using their own sample library to make it sound like an actual orchestra is playing the correct parts at the correct time, and then that final synthesized recording is then used in the TV episode or whatever. So the MIDI orchestrator tends to just stay in the digital realm.
Using computers and stuff, and their own sample libraries, staying in their deep, dark caves, never to be seen again.
Last but not least, conductor, aka maestro. Yeah, they just stand behind the podium and wave their baton. No biggie. The end. Incorrect! They're basically the equivalent of a director of a film, overseeing the performance aspects of a piece of music like dynamics, phrasing, timing, etc. And also, like a film director needing to get the best performance out of an actor, a conductor must be extremely charismatic and inspire the musicians to work as a cohesive unit and become unified in song. So no wonder you get some pretty flamboyant conductors out there like Gustavo Dudamel of the LA Philharmonic Orchestra. Say what you want though, he knows how to get incredible performances out of the musicians he works with. I mean, look at him. Wouldn't you be pumped if your conductor was this pumped? Hype! Let us review. Composer. This blank page mocks me. The vastness of this empty void causes such turmoil within. Oh, hey, look, I wrote some music. Something from nothing. Arranger. You know what's better than Smells Like Teen Spirit? A marching band playing Smells Like Teen Spirit. Something and or a reimagining of something that already exists, which can mean both working with the composer or doing it unbeknownst to the composer. Dig my remix? 9. Orchestrator. Hey, I wrote this cool melody. What would it sound like if it was played by a whole orchestra on a stage? Leave it to me, good sir.
MIDI orchestrator.
Hey, did you get that MIDI score file? Did you like that flute part? That's not how flutes work, bruh. Let me fix everything you've done with my computer in solitude, in darkness.
Conductor.
Follow my lead, follow my tempo. Aren't you pumped to play since I'm pumped to? So there you have it, folks. I hope you learned something today. And if you didn't, I don't care. Don't forget to join my Patreon page where I go over some exclusive content for your eyes only if you give me a little bit of money or whatever. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And don't forget, always be listening.
I got merch. Link in description. I got Bandcamp. Link in description. I got a Patreon. Link in description. I got Etsy. Link in description. I got a kids book. Link in description. And don't forget, always be listening.
Oh, he even got his own little hip hop theme.
Yeah. He's got all the bases covered. It sounds like he's doing it all right.
Yeah, at Elon Osborne on YouTube. Tell me he didn't remind you a little of Stevie T. He's got that same kind of energy and
Kind of. Yep.
crazy humor.
Yep. Can be, some people find it a little distracting, but I like it. I thought it was well done.
No, it's more lighthearted.
Yeah, exactly.
And man,
Now-
he cleared up the differences between those 4 different roles.
Oh, absolutely. And you do find that, at this point, some people, they go through all those as stages instead of being, separate jobs or whatever. It's like, hey, I have nothing. So, okay, I'm going to songwrite. Now I have something, and now I can be the arranger and figure out how to make that sound better. A lot of it also, we talked about any song that's going to be a good, memorable song should be able to be reduced down to just being played on an acoustic guitar and a singer, or a piano and a singer, or whatever. You should be able to boil it down to something that's, memorable enough. It shouldn't need 17, guitar parts and 15 whatever keyboard parts. You should be able to, get it down to the essence and have that essence be memorable. And then, then you got yourself a good song on your hands.
Yeah, and a lot of these roles, especially with the arranger and the orchestrator, they're more about like extending that simple melody into multi-part sounds and focusing on different instruments where orchestras would come in and actually fill out those parts.
Yep. Got to figure out where the bagpipes go in the song.
Yeah, I like how when he was talking about composers, like there is a difference between the classical composers that we're used to from music theory class to composers. They focus more on mood and themes more so than trying to be the Beethoven where you're scoring everything. And, they were really writing the complete story in the old days, where today's modern composers are looking for moods to go with the scoring that they're doing to the film or TV.
Yeah, and that's what I like about when they're talking about somebody getting a rough draft of a movie, for example. I mean, that would be so exciting. Like, be able to get that, and you're watching the scenes, and what emotion does that bring out of you? And you're trying to get that emotion into the music that you're creating. That sounds like it would be just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, the modern composer is definitely more in about emotion of the moment.
Might be a fun experiment some night. Like, take a classic movie that you know really well, and just mute it and just put it on in the background. And then what if I were writing the music to this? And then whether you're remembering what that part sounded like, or whether you're just putting in your own thoughts about how the emotion should go in this particular scene. It'd be a fun little experiment to try sometime.
Yeah, and I also found it interesting with the orchestrator, how he mentioned the difference between sometimes their job is to prepare it for an orchestra, and in other cases, the MIDI orchestrator, which I can relate to. Like that's what
I saw that when I was like,
and the sample pack he mentioned, the Hollywood Orchestra samples, is an awesome pack. If you can get your hands on it, it sounds gorgeous.
Nice, good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, of those jobs, what about arranger?
Yes, we need.
What does it take to become a music arranger?
We need to see more about this arranger he speaks of.
Yeah, exactly.
And this one,
whose channel?
This one comes from Air Gigs, which is at Air Gigs on YouTube.
Nice. And that's a new one for me.
Take your music to the next level.
All right.
And as you can see, he's got some videos on all sorts of different songwriting, recording, performance. He's not kidding.
Nope, no messing around.
No,
But let's start with.
and he even covers, like, you know, some of the producers out there like Dre and Rick Rubin, so he's not fucking around.
Going to get it all. Now we've got what it takes to become a music arranger.
Hi, welcome to the AirGeeks blog. What is the spectrum under which arranging in music is enclosed? Before answering to that, let's pretend that you know nothing about it. A very direct way to introduce what arranging in music means to someone that doesn't know about the subject is, how come this melody becomes possibly this? Or this? Or this? To which extent arranging involves proper musical knowledge? It depends. Giving a full shape to a given couple of melodies, for example, is already a start. The point in which composing and arranging are almost the same thing. Changing this or that chord, instrument or rhythm could be considered already properly arranging. Whatever we do to a rough composition with the intention of making it better equals arranging it. Arranging is taking decisions, so the amount of knowledge or elements that you have in order to make either poor or amazing decisions is, I think, crucial. But what does an arranger do exactly? There is a difference between arranging your own music and becoming a professional arranger. Arranging your own music involves mostly, not fully, but mostly, achieving a balance between the need of working on your original composition and knowing what could be the best way of working it out. Becoming a professional arranger, on the other hand, implicates more than just spicing up an idea. It's not that there is an exclusive, one and only list of things that you need to know to become an arranger, but here is an idea, an approach, a suggestion. Shaping, harmony, instrumentation, orchestration, technology, social skills. Giving a shape or a form to a piece of music is very important because it will make a song more or less satisfactory as the music runs through time. There is some sort of instinct, some kind of what your body is already asking or expecting to hear. Of course, the surprise element could be very substantial every time that it is well implanted. My advice is that you start listening from the beginning always, or at least from the previous section of the piece that you are trying to arrange. That amazing guitar solo is incredible. I recorded it after the first chorus, but perhaps its powerful nature could be amplified even more after the second chorus, or at the end of the song, or as an intro. Shaping is also giving the right length to a piece. You don't want people to get bored after a while. That, by the way, is more related to where you place different elements and not so much to how long a song is. This song is very long and it's amazing. As you already may know, any given note can be harmonized in a huge amount of ways. Chords are beautiful. They produce a feeling of augmentation. This feeling, however, could be distorted depending on the decisions you make. Harmony is an enormous subject matter, but I'd like to mention briefly just a couple of parameters where you could stand and from which eventually you can make good choices. Correlation and style. Again, chords make notes or phrases sound much more satisfactory, only you need not to fail at doing the right decisions. A big part of this will be determined by the knowledge that you have about the subject. If you don't know the basics, consider getting into it seriously, especially a jazz-oriented approach to harmony. Otherwise, chords will overwhelm you, like as if you were in front of a sea of uncountable elements that have no correlation or hierarchy between them. Understanding the functionality of harmony is like having some sort of map where you can see what roads are available. Of course, beautiness and satisfaction are both subjective, but at least you can distinguish that there are areas, neighborhoods, cities, and that you can take different roads to travel from one place to another, so you would not get lost as if you were blind in the middle of the desert without knowing where to go or how to get out of there. About the style, you can play a beautiful chord, isolated. It doesn't mean that in certain contexts, that same chord will not sound awful, discrepant, or disruptive. Using the same location map metaphor, Imagine you start telling a story of you in Paris in a little cafe having a nice chat with a friend, when suddenly and without any reason you appear in North Korea having a chat with Kim Jong-un. You can do that, of course, but it needs to be intentional, and you need to go from one situation to the other one through a more or less correct way of traveling. Otherwise, your idea won't work smoothly until your intention is for it not to run smooth. So be careful. This chord could be nice in this context. But not so much in this other context. Instrumentation has to partially deal with the style also. If you start working as an arranger professionally, you have to be aware of the style of music that the person you are arranging for has asked you to work on. Try to be very clear about it. Is it pop, funk, classical, Middle Eastern, rock? And if it is rock, is it modern, 80s, 60s style? My arrangements are mostly oriented to acoustic performed instrumentation. If you are thinking of taking a similar path, my advice is that you don't stick to a particular instrument. Learn the basics of as many instruments as you can. The more instruments you record yourself, the more control you'll have over your arrangements. You don't need to master an instrument in order to use it for a particular production. Playing live gigs is a different thing. In music production, the focus is the sonic result, not if you are a virtuoso at all the instruments you use. If you are more into beats and more electro or virtual instruments, then subscribe to whatever site keeps you posted about the latest available VST. Right now, everything is so competitive that in a very short amount of time, the modern sound can change all of a sudden without you being aware of that. You cannot be behind your client in that regard. No one wants to deal with an arranger or beat maker that is not aware of what the modern sound is like nowadays. The reason why I am mentioning orchestration is because studying the subject brings you to the acquisition of the 3D factor in music. The families of instruments in a traditional Western orchestra are well defined. Each combination between families or individual instruments produces a particular resultant. The acknowledgement of this will help your brain to keep in mind that. And then there is contrapoint. If you've never have studied contrapoint, then you're missing an extraordinary universe of possibilities. And this is not alien stuff. When you do a second melody to your chorus, not rhythmically parallel, I mean, you are already working some contrapoint. This could be brought to a high level of complexity for which understanding and or executing, again, you should have some knowledge. Otherwise, you can produce involuntary disastrous results. Disastrous. For really getting into contrapoint, listen to Johann Sebastian Bach. As an arranger, you need to focus mostly on the recording part of the technology, unless you want to become also a mixer and mastering engineer, in which case I would advise the same thing as in the instrumentation section. Meaning, update all the time, research about what plugins and techniques the top engineers are using right now. If your task is only arranging, then it won't hurt to learn the basics of mixing and mastering, but that's not mandatory. What you absolutely need to know very well is your workstation. Whatever you use, Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase or wherever, become a master at it. Watch tutorials, get courses, put time into it. Everything needs to work fluently. You can't afford to be frustrated with technology if what you want and need is being able to produce ideas all the time using different setups, different instruments, in different styles of music. If you want to work as a professional arranger, you not only need experience and knowledge, but also social skills. You need to think it this way. Someone is leaving in your hands their wishes of crystallizing their emotions through a very nice piece of music. So you must work for that purpose, not for money. You will get paid, but that's not the point. You want this music to sound super great in the first place, which by the way will lead you to get more work, which will make you get more money if that is what you want in the end. When you do a good job, your client experiences absolute happiness. It is an enormous satisfaction to listen to your song, an intimate and personal piece of music, fully produced. And arrangement is, I'd say, the most important part of it. Be sincere with your clients. This is an intimate part of them, and no one wants to be foolish. Try to understand what the composer wants and needs, but also share your thoughts about their expectations. Present to him or her more than one option to choose from. Clients adore that. Be in touch all the time. Communicate with them as they were your best friends. In fact, if someone is doing music, composing, and writing lyrics for their songs, it means that you and him or her have plenty of things in common, which makes this person a great candidate for being your friend. Perhaps even your best friends, who knows. Make their music sound so good that they would never have expected or imagined it would sound the way it does. If instead you've been commissioned a corporate gig or a commercial, an audio brand or something like that, then you need other type of social skills. Now you're part of a team. You need to understand that there is a chain of people that will interfere in your decisions, and you need to be prepared for doing whatever is needed to be done. Even when that implies you doing something you don't agree with, and even when what you consider the best option, the one that you think is perfect, is not accepted. In this sort of environment, always be nice. Never get offended. Don't take things personal. A task needs to be completed. You've been called because someone considers that you can cope with this task. So you do the best of your best and be prepared for working against some track if it is needed. Even from zero, there is no space for personal feelings. I am not talking about emotions. Being able to produce emotions is precisely the thing that leads someone to hire you in the first place. There are many ways of promoting yourself as an arranger. I'm not an expert on that, but I can give you some few ideas, things that I've done that worked well for me when I started. Make a list of close people that you know they would like to hear themselves singing a well-recorded and produced song of their choice. Who doesn't love that? Arrange a track for them, make experience with them, start learning how to be intuitive with the desires of people. Once you have done that, for free, start looking for singers that you can approach personally. Maybe your friends in Facebook, not necessarily people you know well, and tell them what you are up to. Offer to them an example for free. Take a little section of a song that they already have recorded, rearrange it, and send them few ideas. They will be glad to receive it, and if they like it, they will definitely have you in mind for their next project. Singers need arrangers. Once you have done some experience and you have some concrete examples to show, use a platform like AirGigs to present yourself and offer your service as an arranger. Make a great profile, write a concise and friendly description of what you do. Prepare a nice video, a good looking photo, and share it everywhere. It won't be long until you get your first gig. From then on, the more experience you get arranging, the better you get at it. Thanks very much for watching this AirGigs blog.
Subscribe.
Bye!
It's getting clearer.
Yeah, yeah. Very cool.
Well, one thing I'm
Beautiful.
noticing with the arranger, it kind of lends itself over what we're going to be looking at later when it comes to producing. And, you know, the engineers and the ones who decide on the flavor of the music and how much something might extend or get cut down, the arranger kind of plays a part in that later on when it comes to the mixing and collecting it all together.
Oh yeah. And mixing is a big part of that. So anybody who has done any mixing on any of their own tracks, you've already done part of the job. You know, the how much of this you're mixing versus how much of that you're mixing is part of the arranging. You know, what's the predominant instrument you're hearing at this moment? You know, that's a mixing question, but it's also an arranging question, really.
Yeah, you're halfway there.
Yeah. So you're halfway there.
I like the examples that when he started out, how he showed that, you know, one song and how an arranger might do it this way or this way or this way. And you could really hear the different approaches to the same chords.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where a lot of times just a slight change in feel can make such a difference. And that's also why there's so many songs that use, if you looked up the, the 10 most common chord progressions, for example, you would recognize so many of them. You'd be like, oh, I recognize this song. And somebody else would say, oh, no, that's that song. And somebody else would, no, it's this song, because you're all right. Like every one of those is that chord progression. You just change that feel just slightly, you know, a little more staccato, a little more drawn out or whatever, totally changes the feel and gives you entirely different songs with that same, you know, chord input.
Or to his point on like instrument choice and the feel you get from that. And the arranger's job is to sometimes give it those dynamics and different flavors of what he used spice. Another one who's like, the arranger spices up the track. And
Yep. And with spice, you have to use it sparingly. You're not trying to, dump a pound and a half of chili powder into something. You're trying to put a dash of this and a sprinkle of that to just give a hint of the flavor of what you're trying to do. Not a heavy-handed approach where, this is going to be salty, blah, 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 throw a bunch of salt in it or whatever.
Well,
you have to be nuanced.
Pound of chili powder, you're playing flamenco.
A little bit too caliente.
But he reminds you that, like, this particular role in professional circles, this is a role where you're arranging for the musician, for the client, and you want to know what that client's looking for.
Yeah, the end goal, and that's where the communication comes in. That's super important.
Yeah, it's got to take a lot of trust for a musician to hand it to an arranger and say, now put this together, assemble it.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Now, which page was that versus going to 4-part horn arranging is where we're headed now. That's right.
Now we're going to hit some brass. We're going to kick you in the brass.
Yep. That's something I've always enjoyed. One of the arranging things that I've picked up on, just looking at different things is the, doubling up of the root and sometimes the 5. Like if you look at chords on a guitar, the big fat chords, a lot of times you're doubling up the root and sometimes you're doubling up the 5th, but you're rarely doubling up the 3rd or the 7th.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens in different shapes, but you're more often doubling roots and 5ths. So to me, some of the 4-part arranging, like what my thought would be, if you're using extended chords, 4-part arranging, you already got all 4 tones, there. You're doing major 7s, minor 7s, dominant 7s, diminished. You're already using 4 parts, 4 voices. So you've got it perfectly laid out. But if you're only doing regular chords, like doing regular songs, for example, these are chords where you're not necessarily using 7ths. So I'm curious to see what we're trying to find out is whether it's just a matter of doubling up the root or the 5th, or whether it is about adding extra notes to get other melody line accentuations and things of that type.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm curious is to see the subtle differences between horn arrangement versus string arrangement, because they're very close in approach, but there are subtle differences to how strings get arranged versus horns.
One that would jump out at me is the fact that a string, string sections, I would expect more components to a string section where you have more full chords because they're more lush and filled out. Whereas brass, a lot more, it's about those accents and the punches in those kinds of things, instead of being about background texture almost in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and with brass, sometimes you're limited to certain keys. Like some things like saxophones, they're tuned to certain keys.
Something like a trumpet, especially, I would think, with only 3 valves.
Yeah.
It has the least amount of controls, really. The trombone, even having that slide, you can get to more pitches, or I think it's about the same between a trombone and a trumpet. So that's probably where the limitations are. A saxophone having as many buttons as it does, to me, looks like it should have everything covered. Like you should be able to play in any key, but I'm not familiar enough with saxophone to tell you that.
Well, I've had to transpose some of my pieces to get them down to B flat for an alto.
Sure. Makes sense.
Because his alto sax was in B flat.
Yep. Nice.
So
now this is for
this one comes from @Modern Music Arranger. I mean, the channel was screaming out to me, okay, we're covering arrangement. Well, Modern Music Arranger.
Done.
Yes. Thank you, Jesse.
Yep, good stuff. 4-part horn arranging, and this is horn arranging 2. 4-part horn section, voicings. Avoid voicing mistakes.
Yeah, he's going to show us what to avoid.
Yeah, always good to know.
Everybody, and welcome to the Modern Music Arranger. My name is Jesse Adello. In this video, I'm going to continue a series on horn arranging by talking about arranging for 4 horns. Specifically, we'll go over how to assign notes from 3-part and 4-part harmonies to each instrument. The instruments that we're going to use for this section are the trumpet, tenor sax, trombone, and bari sax. Now, this is a pretty common horn section for pop and funk, but we'll talk about concepts that could work for any combination of instrumentation in whatever genre you're writing for. Before we get into it, a quick disclaimer. This video assumes that you can already read in both treble clef and bass clef,
and that you already have an understanding of how to harmonize melodies over a chord progression. Now, if you need help with that and are interested in a video that covers that particular subject, please let me know, leave a comment down below, and it could be the next video that you see on this channel. And with that, let's get into it. So we're gonna start with the melody that I wrote in Logic. It's just a 4-bar loop that is in a lo-fi style, and it uses 2 chords, D minor 7 and C major 7. And this is what it sounds like. I wrote the melody into the keyboard part. Here we go. Before I start harmonizing, I wanted to show you guys what it might sound like if I played it unison with all the instruments going, okay? So here's the same melody. The melody is going to be in the trumpet, but all the other instruments are also playing the same notes, and they're playing an octave below the trumpet in the appropriate range. So here we go. So the first thing that we're going to do in harmonizing is we're going to go and do 3-part harmonies. So three note harmonies spread over 4 voices. Now, when you're doing that, inevitably you're going to have to repeat at least one of those notes. Okay. So in this case, I decided to repeat the trumpet and the bari sax. Obviously the trumpet's going to stay the same in all these examples, but the bari sax is going to double the trumpet at the octave, and we're going to use block chord voicings. Okay, so I'm going to write my harmonies based on the extensions of D minor 7. So the first note is an E. Below that is going to be a C and an A. I'm using an A minor triad over D minor 7, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here's what that sounds like. The melody sounds really nice. It's really tight. But even in a higher register for the tenor sax and the trombone, I think that the density of that melody actually helps it to ring out pretty nicely. Okay. Since we wrote that first one in block chord voicing or closed voicing, we're going to open that voicing up, and we're going to take the second note down, and we're going to move it down an octave and then shift around the instrument notes. This is an open voicing, and sometimes you're going to need to do that if parts are really high, if the melody is really high in the trumpet, for example, and you need to get the other instruments into a better range. But this particular one yields kind of an interesting result. So let's hear what it sounds like. So that's not the result that I would normally go with. And the reason I say that is because you'll notice that the bari sax is playing the 7th of the C minor, the C major 7 chord. And having the 7th that low, it just sounds kind of muddy with the bass. So I wouldn't actually voice it like that. Essentially, it gets a little bit too low. So what would happen if we switched around the tenor sax and trombone parts? Generally, the tenor saxophone sounds a little softer in its high range, and the trombone is going to sound louder. It's going to have to play louder to play in the high range, but it's not outside of the range. It could be a particular sound that you're going for. So we're going to do that same triad voicing, the same open triad voicing, but this time we're going to switch around the tenor saxophone and the trombone and see what that might sound like. Let's give it a go. To me, it still sounds a little bit too spread out. I think the tenor sax is too low at the end, and you get too much reediness down at the bottom. And I know it's MIDI, but I can still hear that happening. So I'm not really going to mess with that. Also, you'll notice that I started kind of just letting the trumpet take the melody. So I'm not harmonizing those pickup notes. That's just a preference of mine. I really do like to have variation between unisons and harmonized sections. But you can obviously harmonize the entire thing. Just know that it's gonna sound kind of busy if you harmonize an entire song. So I like to use combinations of unisons and harmonies for variety, to give a little bit more variety to my arrangements. We're gonna jump into seventh chords, but written with only 3 notes. You can still get the sound of seventh chords with only 3 notes, okay? So again, I doubled the melody in the trumpet and the bari sax, and the tenor sax and the trombone are playing other notes that emphasize the 7th chords, okay? So this is what that might sound like. I really like the sound of the 9th on the C major 7. So I added that in there. I actually like the sound of this. This is kind of the harmonies, the tight harmonies down on the bottom actually sound kind of nice, and they're in a high enough range that they don't sound muddy. This kind of writing you might see from a lot of Horace Silver compositions in jazz. So experiment with it. I really dig this sound, and it could be something that you're going for too. Okay, so now we're gonna jump into full-blown 7th chords, and we're gonna start with closed position 7th chords. So this is what it would sound like if we assign a different note to each of the instruments. Starting with the bari sax. The bari sax is gonna play an F, the 3rd of the chord, and then the trombone is gonna play the 5th. The tenor sax is going to play the 7th, and finally the trumpet is going to start with the 9th on the downbeat. Okay, so here's what that might sound like. Also, I added the pickup to the other instruments. I wasn't adding it before, and now I'm just adding it to add a little extra color and a little bit more weight to that pickup. So here's what it sounds like, closed position 7th chords. So something interesting happens when you assign a note to each of the different instruments, a different note to each instrument. You actually can't hear the melody quite as well. It's not really emphasized. Now, in this particular example, I had the trumpet a little bit louder so that you can hear it, right? And if you are recording or in a recording session, a recording context, you can obviously crank the volume on the lead instrument. But in a live context, it's going to be just a little bit harder to hear that instrument on top or whatever is playing the melody note, just because there's so much sonic information and harmonic information going on at that point. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now we're going to get to the last example, and I'm going to play the same melody, harmonized the same way, but now we're going to open it up and do an open voicing, okay? This one is actually my favorite one. And I also did a little bit of editing to the bari sax part. One of the notes is not quite within D minor 7. It's a G sus chord. So it does fit, but it's just an arranging choice that I made. Okay, so here's what this example sounds like. 7th chords in open voicing. The reason I like that one so much is because, for one, the bari sax gets a little bit more root movement, and so that just emphasizes the chords a little bit more. Also, the openness of that chord allows for a little bit more resonance in the inner voices. So the inner voices can kind of fill in the harmonic space without it being too dense, right? It's just a more bright and open and full sound compared to a closed and more dense sound in the closed voicings. So I did want to mention one thing before I wrap up with Logic. On the last 7th chord voicing, I took the second note from the top and dropped it down an octave to open up the voicing. That's known as a drop 2 voicing. I mentioned it in another video, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew what that was, and you're gonna see it talked about as a drop 2 voicing. So here's a recap of all the examples that we've played. Okay, so let's recap. First thing, I took a melody over chord progression. Next, I harmonized the other instruments in triads or sevenths on a piano staff, and then I assigned the notes to each instrument based on their ranges and musical context. And finally, I tested it out. Trial and error is part of the learning process. If you're worried about how something will sound in studio, have another version ready to go. It never hurts to be more prepared. All right, guys, so if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up icon and bell icon to get notified about more upcoming horn arranging videos. If you have any questions or shout outs, leave them in the comments below. And that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.
Oh, you got a subscriber here, Jesse.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Love
at
it.
Modern Music Arranger on YouTube, and he's also got a website, jesseaudelomusic.com. I figured you were going to be figuring that out as you watched. And that's what I wanted to hear for the second part.
Yeah, yeah. And that's basically just, doing C major pentatonic at the beginning there. And then the only note that's not C major pentatonic is that second to last note on the way down is the F. So that's coming to the 4 and then the 3. And ending off on the 3 is the other thing that's key because you're not going all the way back down to the C. Starting on that 5, from the 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And then coming down the every other. I like it.
And he started with the triad approach, but it really found the spice with the 7th and the 9th.
Oh, yeah. And that drop too that he mentions at the end, visualizing it the way he did it there, showing the 4 tones there and just taking that second one, highest one, and dropping it down an octave makes the name drop 2 make so much sense because you're just taking that second one, dropping it down. That makes that top one stand alone more, and that makes it stand out more. So that's the melody or the catch up, the catch note at the top there.
Yeah, I like his observation too on the tenor sax as he was trying out different phrasings and the sound you might get depending on the instrument. You might want to avoid going too low. Otherwise, some instruments start to break down.
Too low or too high. I mean, any instrument has its, comfortable range, and you could have a piece that just nudges just outside. Like you were saying, if somebody, you could tune the whole piece down a step. If you were just getting out on that one note and it's only off by a little bit, I can almost get there and it almost sounds right. You could tune the whole piece down, a whole step to make it fit better. Or you could change the instrumentation, say, okay, that note will be picked up down here and this note will be picked up there.
Yeah,
Couple different ways to deal with it.
like a tenor sax or a cello, depending on whether you're doing strings or horns, they do have a limit on their bottom end, but that's when you shift over to a baritone or to a contrabass.
Sure.
If it's not sounding good with those instruments where you're trying to go, then use the contrabass or the baritone because it's comfortable with those instruments.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And each instrument has its own comfortable voice range, and you can go outside of it. There are things you might want to do. You might want a screechy sound effect. You might want a boomy sound effect and go outside their comfortable range. But experimenting with that and knowing where you want to be for the range for that particular instrument definitely helps.
Yeah, it's just like with your voice. Like
Yep.
you need to know when you sound normal and when all of a sudden you're like Michael Jackson level. Ee-hee-hee.
Exactly. Way up high. So that was
But-
definitely some good information in there. Modern music arranger.
Yeah, I like to see that compared to like the string arranging that I've been trying to learn.
Mhm.
Horn arranging is my next big dive.
Yeah. And I do love the fact that it's about getting those chords together and, making it happen there. Getting those chord tones to get across, to carry across the sound of the chords, but also making sure to emphasize the correct note to get the voice leading or melody coming across.
Yeah, it's good to for those who are new to music theory, this is why they drill like learning your triads, because all of this extends beyond that 1-3-5 situation. You
Mhm.
got to know what a chord is before you know where a chord can go.
Sure. And knowing that 1-3-5, you're almost there. Like you want to go to seventh chords, you're only adding one thing and it's the same stack. So you were doing that 1-3-5, add that 7 right there, and you got that same thing going on. And now you're ready to go.
No matter which instrument you're playing, you eventually learn those jumps 1-3-5-7-9.
Mm-hmm. What always kind of made it sink into me is using the 1-3-5-7 as like a set, just a major 7 chord in the one hand, and then if you do the next whole step up minor chord an octave higher, then you're getting the 9, 11, and 13. And that's all of them. I mean, that's every note that you can be using in that particular scale. Again, you can always sharp this and flat that, but that's a different story. And there's only so many of those. There's only those 5 exceptions that you could look at different ways. Like you could look at the F sharp as the sharp 4, or you could look at it as the flat 5. It depends on what you're trying to do and what kind of chord or what kind of scale you're working with. But just leave those off the table for now. Then we're dealing with these notes.
Just be careful if you use them all at the same time.
It's messy. That gets messy. Unless you're just doing.
Oh, well, that's not all at the same time.
But it is using all, in that case, all the white notes. So yeah, even that's not all of them. If I were doing that, the white and black notes, then you'd be getting all the notes. But again, not all at the same time. But all at the same time, that just gets messy. So we're not going to do that. But what do all of the great composers have in common?
Oh yeah, now we're going to get into some real musical wisdom. Nari, like she is truly a monster on YouTube when it comes to music education.
Fantastic resource. Yeah.
Multiple channels. I mean, this happens to be her channel that we're looking at tonight, but we have found her on PBS and other channels that also, spotlight her.
Some of my favorites of hers are ones where she takes a particular song and reimagines it in the style of different composers, because while she's playing it, she's flashing things on screen that are basically, using low notes here, using octaves there, this and that, like different things that are characteristic of that particular composer. And I think those are hugely informational, and they help you understand what's different between a Chopin piece and a Bach piece, for example. Like some people just say, oh, how do you know that that's whoever or whoever? It's like, it's in the style and you can eventually recognize it, but what you're looking for is the types of things that she would highlight there.
Yeah. My favorite episode of hers is still like that first one you showed me where she analyzed, the same piece with different emotions, and how different emotions playing the same piece can really change the piece.
And that is such an important one too. That I highly recommend that one as well.
Yeah, from that point on, I was hooked.
And reimagining one piece in different composer styles, that was another one where you get a very good feel for, using the same motif essentially. But if you were to hand that motif to each of those composers and say, write me something around this, then you get something in their style based around that. And it really helps you appreciate the differences between their individual styles.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's those differences that make those composers the musicians that they are. If you want to stand out as a musician, you're going to have to find your sound in these notes that we're talking about.
Now, the other one's another one that stood out to me of her videos was the deep dives into a different style, like bebop, I think was one of them on piano, like bebop digested by a classical musician. So she's coming at it from a classic training standpoint, but then, just basically dove into the subject of bebop and listened to a bunch of it and kind of analyzed it and how it comes together, and then wrote an original piece in that style for the experiment. So I think that she really has a good way of diving into a topic like that and checking it out.
Yeah, well, her view from a classically trained musician, that's one I can relate to. Like, classical was my go-to at the beginning.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I started with classical piano as well for many years, probably 10 years when I was younger. And then just didn't touch piano at all for many, many decades. And then came back to it more recently.
And I love how she reinterprets those other genres with that vision.
Exactly. Through that lens, like taking a look at it that way. And also just the scientific approach of, what is it that makes this particular style this way? Whether it's, bluegrass or bebop or ragtime, whatever, like just taking a look really at what the elements of rhythm are, or whether it's about the the choice of the register that you're playing and the type of chords you're playing, all those kinds of things can affect that type of stuff.
Yeah, she recognizes the actual reasons we call this genre. Not like some people who are just like, whoa, that's just what that sounds like, like with metal. That's where I've had people like, well, that's just what death metal sounds like. Well, why does it sound like that? Nari goes into that.
Into the why, for sure.
Yeah.
But what this one's about, like what the great composers all had in common. So it's a particular focus on the great composers, and I'm eager to see what she has to say about that for sure.
Oh, she makes a very good point, and crystallization is the key here.
Nice. Let's check it out.
I think there's one thing that all great composers had in common, and it's something that I've noticed after having studied countless scores. Seriously, some of the videos on this channel require me to study a stack of scores. So that very thing that all great composers had in common was that they all wrote great music. But in all seriousness, what I do want to talk about is this thing I'm going to call crystallization, or the ability for a composer to take very simple ingredients, things that all other composers use, and combine them in a way that crystallize into a specific color or emotion. Kind of like a chemical reaction between different elements that create something entirely new. But doesn't all music do that? Yes, especially to those with an imaginative ear, but the difference between great music and mediocre music, in my opinion, is that great music allows you to get there with much more immediacy. So in this video, I want to explain this phenomenon further and show you how I take these insights to take a performance that could very much be mediocre and turn it into something much more impactful. The first example we're going to look at is one of my favorite pieces by Mozart, his Fantasy in D minor. Check out how simple the opening is. These are just arpeggiated chords. Also the melody. Nothing about the notes in the right or left hand are that revolutionary, but they combine in a way that crystallize into a very specific emotion and a story almost. For me, this music makes me think of someone looking back at something one last time, reliving some of the memories, some of the anguish, and also finding some acceptance, all from a little bit of a distance. Obviously, everyone will hear it differently, but I think all great music has this ability to help you tap into these types of emotions. And in my opinion, it only takes a few bars for you to really recognize this. I think a big part of what ensures this is the details. So listen to this same melody, but with the rhythm changed. I think that's already enough to take away some of the inner turmoil, some of the sting of, a lot of people talk about a sigh gesture with this theme. And now with the left hand slightly busier, I think this is not so great. It's not as profound. You don't hear much of the poetry there anymore. Also here, there's something very satisfying about that. It's churning. But again, I'm gonna just change a few notes. There's so much less breathlessness and this hopeless feeling inside, and I think it just becomes much more basic. Now, bringing this back to the concept of crystallization, what these examples show to me is that it's not really about the individual elements, but about the specific combination of how they come together to support the emotion. This music is very efficient. Going off of the last point, there's nothing that we can really add, change, or subtract to make this better. There is already this pristine balance in place. The next example I want to show is one of the most intense moments in piano repertoire, but before we get into it, please allow me to take this time to mention a few things about Henley Verlag, the sponsors of this video. I am very happy to be working with them because I have been using Henley scores for the longest time, and the layout of the notes, the formatting, the details, all of these make studying scores so much easier. Also, all of the digital scores that you see in this video are from Henley. They have a massive digital collection. If you are a tablet user like I am, this comes in handy because you have access to so many scores in one small device. And so if you're not already using the Henley Library app, I highly recommend it. So now let's get back to the music. This example comes from Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata. Separate ingredients in the music here, again, are super simple. We have a single minor scale just going straight downwards. Then it contrasts into a section that's stormy, that has these arpeggiated chords. There's also not something entirely special about the motive. But these combine together to create such a suspenseful and cruel moment. It reminds me of a marble that is just very calmly rolling down a slight slope until it just meets a cliff and falls into a volcano pit. Now, similar to what I did with the last example, I'm going to change a small detail, and let's see how that changes the effect of the music. I'm going to start first with just adding a crescendo. That obviously gives away the suspense, and it changes it completely, just one little marking. How about if I make the scale shorter? I think that's already enough for you to lose that uncomfortable feeling of just not knowing where you're going. The original has the scale going just long enough where it almost drives you crazy. How about if I slightly change the pattern of the next section? I think it's just interesting to see how little shifts can turn music like the Appassionata into something that sounds a lot more generic. Now I'm going to demonstrate to you why I think sometimes how you play something is so much more important than when you're actually playing. For this, I'm going to grab at some insights I've learned while doing projects such as my How to Sound Like series, where I study the styles of famous classical composers and apply them to arrangements I write where I try to imitate their styles. Try to guess which composer I'm trying to imitate. It's kind of hard to tell, right? Now try again. Hopefully that was a little easier and you were able to think of J.S. Bach. So the difference between the two can be outlined by a list of technical terms, but for me, it's really about tapping into a description of the music. So the whole. In the first one, I was really going for something very sentimental and kind of lush. And the second one is this more chattiness, this texture that is drier, almost like a dense piece of wood where you can see all of the grains and there's a sense of order there. One more example. Again, that's probably hard to tell which composer I was trying to imitate. Now listen to this version. Maybe still hard to tell, but I bring this point up just to show you how easy it is to butcher any kind of music, just by little details of how you perform it as well. And it's not about accuracy either. You can play all the right notes. In the examples I just gave you, I was playing all of the notes and I wasn't making mistakes, but the interpretation was really off from one to the next. What I'm learning from all of this is that this crystallization process is more of an art than a science, and there's something that is really hard to explain about it. There's something mysterious about this whole process, which also makes it beautiful. This is also why I think it's really hard to rely so much on music theory and individual elements to try to make a composition great. You really need to combine them in a way where you're driven more by maybe the purpose of the music, the intention, the emotion that you're after, and then things will gel in a way where at a certain point, it'll bloom into that color, that emotion that you're looking for, rather than trying to piece together things in a very technical way. By the way, if you found some of the terms and the references hard to follow, I'm finally going to be releasing my booklet that will help bring you up to speed with the music theory. So do look out for that within the next month. So there's so much more to this topic and so many different ways to answer the original question. Let me know if you want me to dig a little deeper into this. And at this point, I want to turn it around to you all. What do you think of the things that I talked about in the video? I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much to my patrons on Patreon for your continued support. Thank you all for watching, liking, and subscribing. And I'll see you very soon in the next video.
Absolutely.
Love her.
love her. Love the stuff on their channel. Love the way she breaks that stuff down. And again, whether it's the pop-up stuff in the video, you saw little clips of it right there where, it had the different composers and the different styles. Like, that was a quiz based on it, but the other one was just a presentation of, this is this style, this is that style, and this is what makes them different. And understanding that really is kind of the crux of what was a problem for me in classical music in the first place, learning it. If I were just presented paper and I'd never heard the song, I would look at it and try to play it, but it didn't make as much sense musically to me. Like it's hard to get the exact performance out, the exact interpretation that the composer was going for. So once you actually hear it, though, using the paper to remind yourself, oh yeah, that's the section that does the da 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 whatever, that's better. Like rather than trying to learn a piece the first time from paper, I would listen to it while looking at the paper so that I'm seeing, oh, that section that I'm hearing looks like this. So I can kind of compare and get, the view of what it is as well as the sound of what it is at the same time. But yes, we definitely love her channel, love her content, and a lot of great stuff there. Can't recommend it highly enough.
Oh, and I love how she summed it up, like the whole crystallization thing, that moment when it gels and then blooms. And that's where everything you've put together has reached that moment of flowering musically.
And that one, coming down rolling down that hill and then falling into the volcano pit, that's a perfect. Perfect
A
analogy of what's
a
going on.
great example. And then when she showed, like when she was saying guess the composer and the
Mhm,
Bach one,
mhm,
and the difference between the first example and then when she did it Bach style, i-
mhm,
she was spot on in her
mhm,
analysis of Bach. That's how he always was, bouncy, plucky, and
mhm.
um,
She nails
it's
the elements. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, she knows the composer.
Yeah, she can chameleon herself into the style of any of them, and that's where I think it was the Happy Birthday one, where it's basically take the song Happy Birthday and reimagine it in the style of each of those different composers, and being able to just kind of jump into the okay, now I'm this guy and play it the way he would compose it, and then now I'm this guy and play the same theme but how he would compose it, and going through the different ones. Very interesting stuff there.
Yeah, her appreciation of, you can tell she truly appreciates music to be able to understand at the composer level like that.
And to be able to just jump in and out of that section, with all those notes at the bottom and those slight changes, where how easy it is to butcher that by just oh, you're looking at the paper logo, oh, it looks like do 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 do, so you just start playing it like that, and you don't realize it's actually got that pause in the middle that makes all the difference in the way the piece comes across. And intensity, I mean, crescendo, decrescendo, knowing where and when to intensify or to slow down to make a piece really carry more weight.
Yeah, and what was the scoring that she mentioned in there that she gets it Henley?
I believe that
I'm
was
gonna,
it. I think she has it right there in the description there.
yeah, I'm gonna have to look for that because they could not have asked for a better endorser of something
Absolutely.
like that.
Absolutely.
Sold, Nari.
Yeah, yeah. And the digital versions as well. I mean, being able to have a pad with just all that stuff in there and be able to, you could just, wherever you are, you could be sitting in a park and just have the pad. And she's done a couple of those too, where she did like her bebop piece, I think it was. She's sitting in a park for the final, or the funk piece, sitting in the park and just had a little tiny keyboard and just playing it, doing her little video in the park there. And it's the kind of
But
thing where you could just have a tablet next to you and have the score open if you need to and just play along.
and I've been wanting to improve on my staff reading,
Hmm.
and that approach with the MIDI's part of the staff, and will make it a lot easier for me to relate what I'm seeing with what I'm hearing.
Right. And that's, to me, that's the most important thing, is if you're going to be playing a new piece, knowing what it sounds like, either before you have the sheet music in hand or when, before you attempt to turn the sheet music into music, like actually hearing it, actually, being played by someone who plays it well, like, finding a version of the song that you like and then listening to that, appreciating how that, comes from this that you have on the paper becomes that beautiful sound that you're hearing.
Yeah, it's a rare musician these days that can actually just look at a sheet of paper, never heard the song, and play it perfectly just from what they see on the paper. I mean,
It's a lot of
notation
experience. Yeah, yeah.
notation shows you a ton of stuff, but there's still certain dynamics and things that don't always translate to the staff.
Hmm. Now, if anyone's going to pull it off, she is. But
And she gave me an idea for a future episode. I've been wanting to do it for a while,
nice.
uh, covering the musical terms
Hmm.
and all those different musical terms that
Hmm.
I I, I used to know them in my music theory years, and a lot of them have gone by the wayside. But I think it'd be good one night to actually go and look at,
Hmm.
like, what a staccato is, what a
Oh yeah,
pitch
fortissimo, pianissimo,
is.
all those. Yeah.
We're gonna have to get Italian.
We're gonna have to get Italian and start talking about all of
Oh,
that.
Mario.
It's okay.
So if you haven't checked it out, at Nari Soul,
Hmm.
you will, for those of you who appreciate music, you will appreciate her vision of it.
You can spend
And
hours there and just, whether it's appreciating the way she plays, because that's just fantastic, or going through all of the instructional stuff to see how she breaks all of it down and makes it digestible and it comes across. It just, I can't say enough good things about it.
you will learn,
Hmm.
you will feel, you will be inspired.
Absolutely. All of those things. Now, if we go to compose cinematic music specifically for like film and TV, what do we
Yeah,
think?
he got me just on the channel name. Like, okay, we're going to cover composers, then
Mhm.
Composing Academy fits the bill.
Yep. We're in.
He almost got two in actually, because there was another one that he was covering, mixing for composing, and I figured, we'll probably have a mixing night anyway, so
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad that I found the channel now because it's ready for that night.
Excellent.
And I think it is Composing Academy at YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
At Composing Academy 8270.
Ah.
And he also has an Instagram /composing_academy.
Mm-hmm. And this will be for how to compose cinematic music in film, TV, drama _style.
Yeah, for those of you who are looking for possible work as a composer, this is the field to go after. A lot of work out there.
Yep.
It's Simon from Composing Academy, and today I'm going to show you how to compose some piano-driven cinematic music, just like this. This type of music that would fit as underscore in a film or TV drama is heavily inspired by film composers such as Thomas Newman and Harry Gregson Williams. If you want to grab the PDF step-by-step walkthrough of the piece, check out the link below in the description. In order to establish a calm tone, I'm going to start with some piano chords as the main focus for the opening. These are going to be using the mid and upper range of the piano, featuring open voicings, meaning that the notes stacked in the chords will be wider spaced or further apart than normal triads. Start by choosing 4 chords. I've got a C open 5th, which has no middle E or E flat, meaning it's neither major or minor, an A flat open 5th with an added 6th note, B flat major, and then an F open 5th. I've used the open 5th chords to give the music a modal and ambiguous quality, something composers such as Thomas Newman use a lot. Next I'm going to copy these 4 chords again, but changing the voicing on the last 2 chords, adding a 9th or the note of C to the B flat major chord, and adding an A to the last F chord to make it F major. So already, you can see I have a mixture of repetition to provide continuity, whilst changing small elements such as a couple of notes to give a sense of development between these 2 sets of 4 chords. I'm aiming to turn this first section into 4 separate phrases, or mini sections, so for the third phrase, I'm going to copy the first 4 chords I originally had again. To finish this opening section, I'm then going to have 2 more chords which help to conclude this introduction. An A flat open 5th chord with an added 9th, followed by a B flat open 5th chord with an added 9th again. Adding these 9ths is a great way to add some extra emotion to the chords. Now I've got the chords for the piano, I want to use 2 pianos layered together to form the sound. This original sound from Sound Iron's Emotional Piano, and then I'm going to add the Malmsjo grand piano, which helps to add some extra definition to the sound. To add some additional interest in the background, I'm going to next create a simple accompaniment underneath the piano chords. For this style of music, pads, or long sustained soft sounds, work well. I'm using a couple of different pad sounds from Omnisphere, which I've layered together from the beginning, playing one long held sustained note of C. From bars 8 to 13, I bring in different pads, just to keep the sound fresh, along with giving a slightly different sonic quality. There are some amazing pads available in the free Labs range from Spitfire Audio, which I definitely recommend that you check out if you don't have something like Omnisphere. Also from bar 8, I bring in these flautando strings from Spitfire Audio's Chamber Strings library. These are just playing long held sustained notes of C and G, acting like pedal notes over the changing harmony in the piano. Next, to create some movement, I've used this reverse piano patch from Rev by Output, which alternates between the notes of C and G. This effect can easily be achieved without the specific sound from Rev. Check out my video Reversing Piano Sounds to learn how to do this with any piano in a DAW. Finally, I've made use of this mandolin, which is from Spitfire Audio's Free Labs range, to give some added sonic interest. Playing a very simple part, is just playing Cs as eighth notes or quavers, helping to add some motion. Let's take a listen to the whole section. As the music progresses into the next section, I'm going to use both harmonic and orchestration changes to help develop the music further, while still retaining the overall feel set out in the first section. For the next set of piano chords, I've decided to play a C major chord at the beginning, instead of the C5 chord. This still doesn't root the music in the key of C major though, as the following chords are all still chords which are not found in the key of C major, apart from the F major at the end. These chords are similar from the previous opening section, with a few changes to help add to the harmonic development. I'm also going to use instrumentation to help move the music on from the previous section. As I brought in the pads, reverse piano and strings in the second half of the opening section, it makes sense to carry these on in this next bit. I'm going to have the strings playing something a little more elaborate though. I'm using violins playing sustain notes, which are outlining the right hand piano harmonies. The top note of each chord is forming a melody of sorts, which suits the violins well. After the first 6 bars of this section, I then have the violins play up an octave, helping further to add to the depth of the sound as the music progresses. You can see that I've layered the violins using 3 separate sounds. The flatandos from Spitfire Audio's chamber strings, the sustained violins from 8GO's Adagio violins, and some sustained violins from Cinematic Studio strings, which all help to thicken the sound and give a richer texture. For extra impact, I also introduce a simple bass guitar part, which is generally playing the root or bottom note of each chord set out in the piano part, in order to give a boost to the low end. Finally, I layer the mandolin with an acoustic guitar, again from the Labs range, just to help further in thickening the texture, in addition to this Omnisphere guitar sound. When composing, I'm always aiming for the music to morph and change as it progresses, and this can partly be achieved by increasing or decreasing the intensity. I've chosen to further build this piece going into the section, which will again be achieved using mostly instrumentation, but also with some rhythmic development in the piano. The chord changes are now slightly quicker, with the first of every 2 chords now changing every quarter note, instead of every dotted quarter note. Instrumentation-wise, the violins in this next section now have additional high pedal notes of held C and Gs, helping to add to the depth. I've also introduced a shaker pattern, which carries on to the end of the piece, giving a new element of sonic interest, along with the dulcimer pattern, is just playing constant Cs in eighth notes. After a short break, the mandolin, acoustic guitar, and Omnisphere patch also come back in again, helping the music to build further. As I've mentioned before, I often like to end my pieces in the same manner as they began. Here I've done the same, copying the piano chords from the beginning and tagging them on to the end. I've carried on the shaker pattern from the previous section into the ending though, helping to add some cohesiveness between the two sections. So let's take a listen to the whole piece, this time with the notation. So there's a quick walkthrough of the piece. As previously mentioned, it's been inspired by composers such as Thomas Newman, not only in its harmony, but also in the instrumentation as well, particularly with the piano, strings, guitars and dulcimer. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more composing tutorials, tips and tricks.
Oh, fantastic tips.
Yeah. Well broken down.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at his breakdown on his steps, and they're pretty logical. Like first, you start with that chord progression approach. Decide on the instruments you're going to use, which I loved when he had that mandolin. It was the perfect flavor. It almost gave it a tick-tock heartbeat to the
pulse,
to the progression. And then develop that initial idea, those opening measures, the growing the intensity. That's where I loved his example and how he showed it's sometimes it's adding some more instrument layers, and other times it's giving it more hits, like getting to quarter notes, or going from just holding the chords to actually getting that faster tempo within the measure.
Right.
And you can feel that in music when it's building up, which the whole purpose of this for like cinematic scoring is to get that kind of mood and have the build up at that moment when the character has an emotional change.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things about, putting a movie on mute, for example, and just playing along something. And all of a sudden when it's like, shocking, something happened, dun, 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 like everything, changes, the tempo changes, the, chord changes get more drastic or jarring, for example.
It's a great way to practice. When I first got a keyboard back in the 80s, I used to sit there and watch horror movies with the volume off and just try to make my own soundtracks. It's how I began.
Exactly. It's a great way to do it.
And his last step, end where you began. like, man, that has been driven in me for decades now.
Got to bring it home at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as a piano player, like you come in with a theme, and it's nice when you go out with it. It just works so well.
Yeah.
It's hard for me sometimes to get out of that pattern.
Indeed. A lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, the Composing Academy.
Mm-hmm.
The name says it all.
Perfect stop for composing evening.
Yep, at
Looking at the
Composing
difference.
Academy 8270.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah,
And I think,
that's a freshie.
yeah, fresh one. And then we go on to songwriting.
Well, yes, and here we're comparing the composer to the songwriter, which again, sometimes you're both, and sometimes you think you're one, and you're actually the other. And it's good to differentiate like what a songwriter does versus what a composer does. I mean, we've seen some examples of what a composer does so far, and you notice the bleed through from arranger. Like, composers technically have to have arranging skills because they do some arranging as they're doing their composing. They do instrumentation. They use some of those skills over in the composing. And I think the same is going to be true here. Composing and songwriting go hand in hand.
Yep. The buckets are not all mutually exclusive, but there are things that you would focus on as a composer versus things that you would focus on as an arranger, that kind of thing. But there is definitely spillover for sure.
It's good to appreciate, both sides of that skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. This one, and, to go with our last video, we're looking at film and music for visual, a mood.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's at Film Music Mentor. Another freshie.
Nice. And this one focuses on the surprising enemy of good songwriting.
No, this is the difference between a composer and a songwriter.
Oh, sorry, I'm one ahead of you.
Yeah, that's our next
the wrong
one.
place. Sneak peek, everybody. Difference between a composer and a songwriter.
Hi, this is Film Music Mentor, and today's topic, the difference between songwriters and composers. All right, so what's the difference between a songwriter and composer? Films have lots of songs, they have lots of music, but generally songs aren't written for films. They are in certain cases, so there's never a never situation with this. Certainly like a film musical like Beauty and the Beast or Frozen or something like that, obviously songs are written for that. And occasionally songs are written for credits like Despicable Me, things like that. The majority of songs that are used in films are licensed. They want the song for some reason. Maybe it's for montage, maybe it's for a credit sequence, maybe it's to be used as a joke, but most of the songs come after the fact, where the score for a film will be written specifically for the film after it's gone through a series of edits and is pretty much locked. So a songwriter's objective is to take an idea, a catchy musical phrase and a catchy lyrical idea, or maybe in the case of hip hop, some kind of lyrical phrase with a very infectious rhythm, and to let that idea go for 3 or 4 minutes. That's pretty much the world. A song is pretty much about one thing. Now you could say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And yes, of course, there are exceptions. But the vast majority of time, a song is about one thing. So a song generally can only capture a moment or a mood in a film. And a film is made up of hundreds of tiny emotions and dramatic beats and just very, very subtle emotional passages. So a composer has to be able to change their music on a dime. They have to be able to go from something very big to something small. They need to be able to change. So when the song is this kind of one idea, great idea, and it goes for 3 or 4 minutes or whatever, the composer needs to come up with hopefully a great idea too, and they want to exploit that idea in as many ways as possible. They want to exploit that with different emotions, with different tempos, with different instruments, make variations, all kinds of different ways to express this idea. And one of the reasons is it gels a film by having a coherent musical expression. It doesn't only make the film come together. For the composer who has to write heaps of music in a short amount of time, it gives them focus and direction on how to keep this thing unified and to get the job done on time. So the composer takes their good idea and stretches it, exploits all kinds of emotion, all kinds of feeling. And emotions aren't that simple. You know, emotions can be dark, they can be happy, they can be bittersweet. Some piece of music may evoke a sadness and a joy at the same time, a relief, disgust, anger, revenge, action. All of these things need to be expressed, and many more, in a film throughout the 90 to 120 minutes that this film is going on. So when you look at songs, you have to have a lot of songs to cover that. And generally, that's not an approach that works. The vast majority of music that's in a film is instrumental music generated by a composer, sometimes licensed. So basically the difference between the songwriter and the composer is that the songwriter wants to create this tiny, tiny world of one idea, one feeling, one thought, and express it for 3 to 5 minutes. The composer wants to come up with this great idea, the theme for your film, your TV show, and exploit it emotionally, musically, in every way imaginable that provides value to the film. And it's a different skill set. Generally, composers are classically trained. They need to be trained because you don't just show up into the world knowing how to compose music. You have to learn it, whether you're learning it by listening and self-teaching through listening to the work of others and studying it, or you go to a university or a college or any kind of study. The musician needs to be trained in some way in order to be able to be a composer. Songwriters, they can sometimes get by knowing very little. Some of them know a lot. I mean, composer and the songwriter, they're different beasts. And though there's some crossover, like Trevor Rabin, who was the guitarist in the progressive rock band Yes, became a wonderful film composer. Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, I don't know if you remember Devo, but they were big in the 80s. He's become a top film composer, and he's fantastic. He does A-list films, but there's basically two different skill sets. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, if someone writes a song you like and you think, hey, that'll be good in my film, that doesn't mean that they'll be able to score your film. Now, they may want to score your film, but generally what happens when a songwriter writes music for a film, every music cue tends to sound like the introduction to a song. And a song tends to have a steadiness to it, a groove, where film music has to be very light on its feet, be able to change in a millisecond from one kind of energy to another. So composers are very skilled at doing that, bringing you to a climax, bringing it down, adding in, removing, just at a second's notice when the action changes on screen, and we want to keep that tension in the music. So it's just important to know that a composer has a certain skill set. Also, writing music for the voice is different than writing music instrumentally. So if you have a songwriter that primarily writes music by singing and accompanying themselves, that's not really a good technique to write instrumental music. Not that you need to get into all of that, but just to be aware that a songwriter may not have the chops or the technique to write a score. They may not have the equipment to produce the music. Now, a songwriter that also produces music might. And again, it all depends, but there is a difference in terms of the goal for a songwriter and the goal for a composer, and they're different. All right. This is Andrew Marcus. I'll see you next time on Film Music Mentor.
Oh, he's
All right.
he's got a good outro soundtrack too.
Yep. Yep.
Good
I
job,
like it.
Andrew. Yeah, that was Andrew Marcus over at Film Music Mentor on YouTube, and he's got a website as well, fourscore7music.com. Killer domain choice.
Nice.
But I particularly like that video. Reason why I chose it was because his emphasis on, the difference in composing when it comes to film or television, and
Mhm.
whether you're scoring it or you're writing a song for it. Like, a lot of times now you see in the credits they play a song, at
Right.
the end of the movie, and that song becomes a huge hit because the movie. But
Mhm.
this composer who's doing the scoring, as he mentions, there's a lot of different emotions and moods, then they change on the fly.
Mhm.
That's the kind of job where you really got to be doing, like you said, watching it in silence and turning that moment into a mood that
Mhm.
becomes that theme. He must have been listening to Nari, because he said that
Yep.
gels that theme across the movie. You look at these superhero movies, both on Marvel and DC. The composers there, Hans Zimmer, they they have themes for the different characters. So when Batman's showing up or Wonder Woman, they've actually given the characters a mood in music, and the
Yep.
music comes out when the character all of a sudden is about to appear.
Yeah. And you can give those little cues. Like if that character's about to appear, they can give a little tease, a little tease on the music, and the crowd, wow,
Batman's coming.
because they know what that means.
See, that's some great advice he gave there. Learn everything about music for film, content, television, and branding. A lot of you out there are likely making videos and have these ideas, and learning these techniques can help you with what you're doing, or maybe getting some jobs out there. There's a lot of work in this field.
Absolutely. A lot of movies being made, a lot of television, a lot of videos that need music behind them, or just scoring or
Yeah,
whatever.
he didn't even get into the gaming side, which is the biggest chunk of work, and themes and moods. When you with gaming, you notice that, like, they use music in little fragments, so that way, depending what you're doing in the game, the music builds up, and they take the
Yep.
theme and intensify it.
Absolutely. I'd love to do music for video games. Oh man,
Same here. Same here.
that would be awesome. That'd be awesome.
So now that Glenn teased us with our next one,
The enemy of good songwriting.
and yes, now we're going to look at what the songwriters really do, and
Mhm.
how sometimes some things can get in the way of good songwriting,
Oh yeah.
fluid songwriting. And this channel, we've looked at them a couple of times. We had a songwriting night when you were out one night, and
Yep.
I love this channel. The two of them have such a great dynamic. Their tips are incredible, and they really fire you up to, like, want to go right.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
I've been going through
All
this
good things.
channel. Yeah. It's at HTWS on YouTube.
How to write
They
songs.
condensed it down.
Mhm. Nice. 4 letters. Gotta love it.
Mm.
Bring it down to nice and easy. And this one is the surprising enemy of good songwriting.
Yeah, avoid some of these.
Avoid all of these.
world of songwriting, where lyrics and melody intertwine to create magic, there is an unassuming enemy lurking in the shadows, and it's not lack of talent or creative inspiration that is the biggest threat to good songwriting. It's actually something far more unexpected. This enemy actually lives inside the good intentions of songwriters, but if we can't recognize it, it can creep into every song we write. In this video, I'm going to tell you what that enemy is and also how to avoid it. Lyrics like this make me cringe a little inside, and I suspect that they make you feel exactly the same way. And yet they pop up everywhere, and they actually pop up in the lyrics of people who are trying really hard not to write like that. Why? Well, here is the enemy of good songwriting. In the very noble intentions of songwriters to write songs that are universally relatable, the enemy is that we mistake universal for generic. Something that is universal is not the same thing as something that is generic. And in the attempt to write something that appeals to lots and lots of people, the mistake is to strip your lyrics of everything that actually makes them personal and therefore relatable. Universal ideas are experiences and emotions that are shared by lots of people. And the feeling when you hear a song like that is you deeply feel like, oh, me too. Like that's exactly what it was like. That's exactly how it felt. And here is the paradox of great songwriting. And of course, I am specifically talking about lyric writing here. The paradox is, in order to successfully create that connection for our listeners, we do not want to strip our lyrics of all the idiosyncrasies and all the specifics that make that idea and experience and emotion come to life and feel real and true and authentic. We need to keep those details in the song because it's those details that conjure the details of someone else's life and make them feel like me too. Let me show you an example of this from a beautiful song that absolutely nails the idea that including specific details is actually what makes a song more relatable and therefore more universal. And the song is Nothing by Bruno Major. So I'm actually going to sing the first verse for you because it totally captures the beauty of the specifics that he puts into the lyrics. Tracksuits and red wine, movies for two. We'll take off our phones and turn off our shoes. We'll play Nintendo, though I always lose. 'Cause you watch the TV while I'm watching you. Let's see how we can ruin this song by letting the enemy creep in and mistaking universal for generic. We sit on the couch, just you and me. We love to hang out, nowhere I'd rather be. Can you feel yourself dying just a little bit inside? So generic does not mean universal, and in fact it often has the opposite effect because it removes everything that actually triggers the life experience that creates that sympathetic response from a listener and creates that moment of connection. When we take out the details, we take out the relatability, which actually makes something less universal, not more universal. The late and great Leonard Cohen said it beautifully in his wonderful interview in the book Songwriters on Songwriting. We seem to be able to relate to detail. We seem to have an appetite for it. It seems our days are made of details. And if you can get the sense of another person's day in details, your own day of details is summoned in your mind in some way rather than just a general line like the days went by. It's better to say watching Captain Kangaroo, not watching TV. Sitting in my room with that hopeless little screen, not just TV, but hopeless little screen. I think those are the details that delight us. They delight us because we can share a life then. It's our sense of insignificance and isolation that produces a great deal of suffering. There's no better exercise that I know of for sharpening this technique of transforming ideas into specific details than the exercise called sense writing. And I've talked a lot about sense writing in other videos, which you can check out here and click on it and just bookmark it and go to it at the end. I've also included a free PDF in the link in the show notes, which is to an ebook I wrote called The 5 Best Exercises for Writing Great Lyrics, and sense writing is number 1. So you can download that and really go into detail there. But I'm going to demo an exercise for you right now that's a sort of abridged version of sense writing and something that you can do really quickly to practice this idea of taking something general or generic and really transforming it into something that puts a picture in the mind of your listener. So here is the exercise. I call this exercise turning the dial because we're taking something that is generic and we're turning the dial up on the level of detail. So let's take a generic line like it was a normal, lovely Saturday afternoon. This line shows me nothing. It tells me something, but I see nothing and therefore I really don't feel much. Here is the exercise. I'm going to set a timer for 6 minutes, and for 6 minutes straight, I'm going to come up with as many single lines as I can in 6 minutes that turn that generic idea into specific sense-based detail. The goal here is to really paint a picture. It's almost like a small little photograph that you're trying to take with words. Now, the lines don't need to be connected. In fact, they shouldn't be connected. They're just single little photographs of pictures that are designed to show a normal, lovely Saturday afternoon rather than merely telling about a Saturday afternoon. So I'm going to write one line and then I'm going to move on to the next. Let's have a go. All of these lines do such a lovely job of really painting a picture, and it invites you into the world that I'm creating. Now, it's not that I'm going to use all of these lines. It's not even if I wanted to use one of the lines that I would literally use the whole image. I can extract images out of it that really work hard to paint the picture. Let me show you this in action in another song. This is the lyric to the song Dearly Departed Friend by the American country bluegrass Americana band Old Crow Medicine Show. Now, this is the second verse to their song, and their whole song is full of all kinds of incredible details that really draw us into the story. But I really want to show you this verse because it's related to the exercise we just did. So let's check this out. Barbecue grills and lawnmowers, kids on four-wheelers and ice cream trucks. Yeah, they buried you on a Saturday. Georgia lost to Tennessee. You would have liked that, I know. Afterwards, we went to O'Charlie's. Your mama's boyfriend got drunk, saying it should have been me. And I wish it was. Him, I mean. So I went home, got drunk, and watched the TV. Can you see here how the songwriters are actually painting the picture of a normal Saturday? Now, this song is not about a normal Saturday. This song is about attending the funeral of a friend, but it's actually the specificity of the imagery they're using to paint the image of a Saturday kind of just rolling on as normal out there, while actually the singer is experiencing a day that is unlike any other Saturday they've experienced. That really creates the emotion through the contrast of those two experiences. The normal Saturday out there and the funeral happening in the world of the songwriter. One little caveat that I want to put on the idea of including details into your song lyrics is we're not really talking about adding ornamentation onto your lyrics. I'm not talking about shoving in as many adjectives and adverbs as you can. In fact, adjectives and adverbs tend to also be enemies of good songwriting and good communication, but the importance of nouns and verbs cannot be overstated. I love this quote from the Stephen King book on writing. Stephen King here is talking about descriptive detail, and he says, "For me, good description usually consists of a few well-chosen details that will stand in for everything else." In that Bruno Major song, Tracksuits, Red Wine, and Movies for Two is just so beautiful. It tells us so much. It tells us about their relationship. It tells us about their age. It tells us about their level of comfort and intimacy with each other. It tells us that it's something romantic, but shows us the details of that, but not too many details. The inclusion of the playing Nintendo is so charming in that song. And again, it kind of tells us something really charmingly quirky and creates that sense of relatability. One thing I would love you to notice, however, in that verse is the almost total absence of adjectives and adverbs. So don't rely on adjectives and adverbs to do this job, but also understand that not every line of lyric needs to be dripping in the diamond dust of detail. Really look at your song lyrics and aim for 1 to 2 lines per section. And mostly here we're talking about verses, not even choruses. Choruses can do whatever they want to do. But in the verses where your job is to really paint the world of the song and draw us in to the who, when, where, and what of the song, really aim for 1 or 2 lines that use a few key specific images, mostly nouns and verbs, that do a lot and really help us enter the world of your song and connect with you and your experience of the world. If there are songs whose lyrics you absolutely love that do this in a really beautiful way, please let us know in the comments. And if you want to dive more deeply into sense writing, you can check out this video right here. Happy writing, guys. I'll see you next time.
Oh, you see why I've been hooked on this channel since I found it?
I can indeed. Lots of good stuff there for sure.
And so many good tips. You know, the way she finalized it all and was saying, you know, don't get carried away with adjectives and adverbs. It's so true. Like it's like book writing, writing in that sense. How you are descriptive without being overly descriptive with the adjectives and the adverbs. Same applies to songwriting, more so because you have less space to work with.
Well, and the sense writing makes so much sense to me as well, because so many times just thinking about a scene or thinking about something that you want to write about, thinking about it from the aspects of sense. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What's the taste? You know, you like experiment or you know, explore all of those. And it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to use those exact words, but, you know, you explore what is, you know, what does the scene make you think about? What did they hear in the distance? Was it silent? Was there clamoring in the distance? You know, what's going on, you know, audibly? And then what do they see? Is it dark? Is it bright? You know, you know, you see sharp things? Is it all rounded? You know, there's all kinds of different ways you can go with each of those individual senses, but figuring out what fits or what most carries, like they were saying, carries the most weight of what you're trying to convey in as concise a way as possible.
What did she say? Paint the picture. You know, that's what you're doing there. You're painting the picture. Now sense it and portray it.
Yep. And even if you don't use each of those, using that little experiment she was talking about there, take that 6 minutes and write out the individual lines, and each of those lines could just be enough to kind of set you into that whole scene and allow you to see it from another perspective. So take a line you came up with about something about the way it looks, and now add the sound component to that scene, or the way it sounded. You know, you see a line that you wrote about how it sounded. You don't want to use that line, but take that image that you had of how it sounded and what did it look like, you know, and put the visual component to it. So you can kind of go a number of different ways with it to try to come up with good ways to really convey what you're trying to convey, whether it's a visual or whether it's an audio thing you're trying
and if you get really creative, you can take something that might have been a visual and make an analogy to it that represents a sound, or vice versa.
Exactly. Connecting them in a synesthetic kind of way.
I think the best thing she hit on was right at the beginning when she was talking about, you know, try to be universal and not generic.
Exactly.
That was really what got me wanting to put this video up. Was that's such an important message that, like, I'm constantly trying to tell those who are trying to write and bounce them off me not to get so generic. Like, love is a universal theme, but like every love song that I get thrown at me, oh, can I write to this? They're all saying the same damn thing. Like, I'll do everything for you, or you know, the only person who's managed to pull off the generic and make it sound good was Jake Zeke with his cliche love song. Like, he did it on purpose, but he took everything that would normally be like a weak approach to love and found a way to actually make it universal to the listener so that they could relate to it.
And merge it all together. Yeah. I love the way he did that. That was another good songwriting exercise.
Yeah. And that's what's cool about this channel. You'll just about every video you'll watch, she will give you like a useful exercise or approach that will help you.
Indeed. Like the channel, and I like the stuff. Very good information there.
Yep. At HTWS on YouTube. And they do have a Patreon /How to Write Songs. Check them out. They are worthy of support.
Absolutely. And I think next we're going to see about the samurai guitarist. Yes.
Oh, you told me it was going to happen. I must have reset. There he is.
It could just be that it took too long. Yeah. At some point they will all reset at some point.
Well, there's always an asshole in the bunch.
Yeah. But it's not him.
No. Samurai Sensei is awesome, and we've had him on, for some guitar nights and showing like some of the craziest guitars out there. He's got all sorts of different series of videos, but this one, since we were covering songwriting, and after going through this one, the tips in here more out of the box compared to like other songwriting videos that I've come across, and everything is useful advice when you're trying to come up with that approach.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, this one is about subtle aspects of great songwriting.
Everyone, and welcome back to another Sensei series. Today we are looking at 9 subtle aspects of great songwriting. I'm a firm believer in the idea that great songs are rarely written, rather they are rewritten. The first draft is almost never the final copy and often requires significant polishing. The things we're looking at today are those small refining touches that can go neglected. I should note that while I have my specific musical biases, these things should apply no matter what genre you play. And keep in mind, at the end of the day, listen to what the song and your intuition is telling you. Links to individual tips in the description. Let's dive in. Number 1, pay close attention to what vowels are held out. As a non-singing guitarist, it took me a little while to figure out the difference between a clunky lyric and one that rolled off the tongue. A big aspect of this is which vowel sounds we decide to draw out. For example, imagine this simple lyric. Oh baby, you know that I love you. All the vowels that I dramatically held out are pleasing on the ear and easy to sing, compared to, say, these vowel sounds. I see you at the end of the day. O's, ahs, and oohs often sing better than e, a, and is. Number 2, syllable placement. Like I mentioned in our last point, a listener will be more engaged in a lyric if it sounds natural and flows with ease. If we're stressing syllables that should be unstressed, we're going to run into some trouble. It's the difference between saying syllable and syllable. Take, for example, the lyric, Friday night and you're sitting there. Focusing on just the rhythm, it would feel very unnatural to sing it as such. Friday night and you're sitting there. Instead, it'll sound much better like this. Friday night and you're sitting there. I would recommend you take some time to talk through your lyrics. Record yourself speaking them as if they were poetry. Your dictation will make it clear where those natural stresses are. Number 3, chord motion. We're moving into some harmonic stuff here. Now, a tool to maintain interest throughout your song is by invoking change, making things feel like they are moving forward and different in some way or another. There are a few ways we can do this using chords. One thing I like to do is focus my different sections of songs, verse, chorus, pre-chorus, for example, around different chords. If I'm in the key of C, I have the chords C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and B minor 7 flat 5 available to me. If you need a refresher on how I came up with that, check out my video on musical theory. The first chord of your section often sets the mood for it. So for my verses, my progression might start on a C chord, my pre-choruses a D minor, and my choruses an F. Let's hear what that might sound like. Another way you can use chords to create a sense of change is by holding them out for different lengths. If I have a chord change every single bar for an entire song, it can sound stagnant and predictable. Staggering these spacings can alleviate that. Let's look at an example. During the verses, I'll change chords every bar, during the pre-choruses every half bar, and during the chorus, I'll change every 2 bars. Let's see if that helps differentiate the sections. course, you can find many songs that don't take this into account. There's no inherent flaw in a song that repeats the same progression with the same spacing. Instead, this is just something to be aware of. Number 4, melody start and end points. Once you have a decent concept for your melody, I would highly recommend you write it out using standard notation or figure out how to play it on an instrument. Look at which notes you are starting and ending your phrases on. Generally speaking, they'll be the ones with more musical weight on them and thus will stand out more. If you're starting and ending in the same places every time, your melody can sound repetitive and boring. At the same time, you want to be aware of where the melody sits rhythmically speaking. If it begins and ends on the same beat every phrase, you'll face the same issue. Number 5, lyrical spotlights. Certain places in music will carry more emphasis. Imagine a metaphorical spotlight shining on those spots. We want to try and place the more important words of our lyrics in those spots. For example, say I have the line, "The greatest thing in this world is the love I have for you." The words greatest, world, love, and you are the most important ones in delivering our message. So it makes sense that we put those words in places of emphasis like this. The greatest thing in this world is the love I have for you. Emphasizing the words of less value takes away from our message. For example, the greatest thing in this world is the love I have for you. I'm over exaggerating, but you get the point. Number 6, pronoun consistency. At the beginning of a song, we establish a relationship between us and the listener based on which pronouns we use. Is the narrator the subject of this song addressing an audience? In which case a lyric would go, "I think you're great." Am I maybe singing about someone else? In which case it would be, "I think he is great." Or maybe I'm taking an omnipresent view where I'm singing about other people. He thinks she is great. Whatever it is, it's important to maintain consistency. There's no better way to confuse a listener than by switching pronouns mid-song. Moving on, number 7, tense consistency. We want to maintain some sort of coherency with our verb tenses. If part of my song is in the past and another part is in the future, that should be done as a creative device. Let's look at a bad example where our verbs are a mess. Coming home wasn't the same anymore. The house will be cold, it'll echo in the dark. And though your clothes still fill the dresser drawers, you didn't come back to fill my heart. We are all over the space-time continuum here for no apparent reason. Let's try fixing it. Coming home ain't the same no more. The house is cold, it echoes in the dark. And though your clothes still fill the dresser drawers, you won't be back to fill my heart. Here we make 3 statements in the present tense and the last is in the future. This adds to the impact of that final line. The lyric is saying everything in the future will be bad based on all these things I'm currently faced with. Be aware of this throughout an entire song, not just within single sections. Number 8, lyrical direction. In one way or another, you're telling us a story with your lyrics. And in order to tell a compelling story, there needs to be some sort of direction or growth. If you present me with the same idea over and over and over again, what's there to keep me interested? Ask yourself, what new piece of the puzzle am I revealing with this line, and how is that important to the overarching story? If you don't have a good answer, rewrite it. The last point for today is make sure we can root for your main character. Have you ever watched a TV show where you despise the main character? If so, you probably didn't watch it long. We need to care about the central figure of a story in one way or another for us to stay invested. If you're showing us somebody flawed who's made some bad mistakes, there needs to be some redeeming quality that makes these negatives forgivable. I ran into this exact problem with a song of mine once. I had written what I considered a pretty decent song about a guy longing for a girl who had left their hometown. But I grew a distaste for the guy singing the song. He came across as whiny and pathetic. I rewrote one line to change this. The guy says that deep down he's glad that she left because she was too good for that dying town and deserved better. Valuing her success over his love for her is his redeeming quality. The line was, "And though I wish you stayed here, so I was not alone, diamonds don't belong among the stones." Nailed it, Steve. You can listen to the full song with that link. And that's it for today. Keep in mind, there will be times when the things I have recommended shouldn't be used. You always need to listen to what the song is telling you first and foremost. Ultimately, I want you to be able to analyze every aspect of your song so that you can make sure you made the best possible decisions. At first, it may feel overwhelming, but it won't take long before this stuff is instinctual. I want to recommend the book that forever changed how I write songs, Writing Better Lyrics by Pat Pattison. I've recommended it before and I will recommend it again. It's a must-own for any serious songwriter. I will put an Amazon link down there in the description. Thank you all for watching, and to everyone who supports my channel through Patreon, an especially big thank you to you. You guys make it possible for me to make these videos. If you're interested in checking out that program and the unique rewards offered through it, click that link over there. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I will see you again soon.
Oh, hell yes, Steve.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah, I was actually taking notes, and it turns out he put them in the description for me.
There you go. As chapters for. Excellent.
Yeah, I love when they do that.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And a lot of good
But-
stuff there. Again, like it's, figuring out how to get the songwriting out of you. That's the main thing.
Yeah, and
works
you
for
know,
you.
these are the kinds of things that sometimes we don't think of as much consciously when it comes to the syllables. I mean, a good lyricist or writer will find where the words fit, and that was part of his point there, was to like find the points where the key words would fit in and how you say them. It reminded me of that Seinfeld episode where he was trying to say the line, "These pretzels are making me thirsty." And it's the same challenge you have when you're trying to make this line fit to this melody.
Yep. And that actually comes back to what they were talking about before about the sense writing, where for me, a lot of times people would get stuck on something where they're working on a line and there's a word that doesn't fit, or they can't find the right word to rhyme with something else, whatever it is. They're focused on that word and just, I need to replace that word. And they get like, beating their head against the wall on that one word.
Well, and in some cases,
times,
like that past, present, future. About all he did was change one word on the last line to make it go from past to future.
Yep. And that kind of fixed the issue entirely.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it is just about taking that, you can, step back and again, look at that sense writing where is it now you were talking about what it looked like? Okay. Think about what it sounded like, or again, another aspect of the scene, like see the scene in your mind and what's going on there and think of something else, even a small detail, or especially even a small detail to point out and focus on, because that small detail really tells the story of the whole scene. Like they were saying about, the tracksuits and the red wine and what it was in the other one, talking about that kind of stuff as specific things to lock into, to kind of, tell the story in as concise a way as possible. A lot of times you can do that same thing with, shifting senses from the visual to the audio.
Yeah. Listen to the music that you're writing and be aware of these things.
Mm-hmm. And put yourself into the scene rather than, if you get stuck, rather than focusing on what word you're trying to fix, kind of back out and see the scene that you're setting up and maybe see a different aspect of the scene to look at for that line. You can replace that entire line with an entirely different thing that's still relatable to that whole scene. It still helps to paint that picture of what's specifically going on there.
Yeah. Look at it from the outside in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or a different character's perspective even.
And
you got to be careful about shifting around like that. Like they were saying with the time space continuum shifting is one thing, and also the pronouns, like they were saying, shifting from talking about this person to that person. You need to be
and the time of the measures.
The
time of the measures, like he brought in a little bit of arranging skills to decide, like I'm gonna do 2 measures this chord, half a 1 measure this chord, or half a measure. How you approach the timing on those chords will change the flow of the mood.
Absolutely.
And you could really hear it as he did that. You could hear the difference and how it lent itself to what he was trying to put into it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Excellent stuff there.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I like Sensei. Sensei Steve.
Yes, indeed.
At Samurai Guitarist on YouTube and pretty much everywhere else. He's pretty consistent in his Patreon /Samurai Guitarist. Another one worthy of checking.
Absolutely.
Supporting.
Mm-hmm. Now, what exactly does a record producer do?
Oh, they got me twice. I got you back, YouTube.
Must have been a short blip, like you said. But the second one from the same page, but good stuff here.
Well, and this is a question that I've asked myself and have wondered from all the producers that, like, nowadays it seems like everybody's a producer.
Sure.
Which makes me start to feel like nobody is.
Well, just because everybody is doesn't mean everybody's doing it well or doing it right, but that's where it's helpful to be able to help everybody, because everybody can do it. That's the big thing, is that you don't need the same level of equipment that you used to need in order to get into doing stuff. So anybody who has any musical ideas at all can just jump in and start doing stuff. Even if they don't have musical ideas, they could have friends who do that. They could jump in and help to do the stuff and You could just be the recording guy. You could be the guy who does the board, whatever. You could get yourself involved, even if you're not a musical person. So
Yeah, and that's just that the accessibility nowadays to the tools has kind of made it possible for everybody to be a producer. But not everybody, not every musician wants to be. I mean, we definitely run across a lot of them who they just want to do their part. Like, you know, they enjoy music for the part that they do, and they trust a producer to take care of it afterwards, which is fine. Like, it's sometimes it's much easier to deal with that scenario than to try to produce somebody who thinks they're their own producer. Like I sometimes trying to produce somebody who already thinks that they produced it, and like, what do you want me to do at that point? Like,
hit the button that says record.
You want me to just say good job? And sometimes that's the case. If they did a good job, then I can give them that ear and say, hey, yes, nice production. In those cases, it's just, you know, a second ear.
Yep. Looking for confirmation or advice on what could change, or could change, should change, either one.
But if they give you something that really needs extra work, but I produced this, but can you produce it more? Hopefully you get somebody who's receptive to what you're going to do, and you're not stuck in that situation where they fight you on everything you try to do to it, because, oh my God, you're killing my baby. And that makes producing hard sometimes for producers.
One of the hardest is if that person who's feeding you the material, if they're not listening with a good, not listening to you, but listening to the song with the right headphones and speakers, and in this environment and that environment, they might be missing entire areas of the spectrum. Like they're using bad headphones and they're mixing it, and there's just crazy stuff going on in the low end that they're not even aware of. And they send it to you to look at. And then when you send it back, they're like, oh, what did you do? You know, now it's all different than what you sent them, but they didn't even realize that something was out because they weren't looking at the right, the entire spectrum of the song in the first place.
And that happens a lot more, with the band lab kind of situation. You might do something, say, hey, I just did it, posted it, check it out. And they listen on something else, and what they hear doesn't sound the same as what you heard when you were producing and mixing it. And it's a lot harder with that scenario than if you were in the studio and you give them the headphones you were just listening to, and they hear it with the same headphones.
And they're like, ooh. All of a sudden they can hear everything. But
I can see sound.
I think the one we're going to do from this channel here today is about what exactly does a record producer do?
Yeah, Steve's going to be explaining, the purpose of a record producer. We got a theme going. A lot of Steves tonight.
A lot of Steve. Steve's not here, man.
But Dave might be later.
Dave might be back.
He better have the stuff.
But what exactly does a record producer do?
Hey, friends. Have you ever really wondered what a record producer does? It is kind of confusing. I mean, it isn't really analogous to a movie director. A movie director's role is pretty clear-cut. The movie director is directing the film, directing the actors, telling the cinematographer where to put the camera, telling the lighting person how to light the scene, coaching the actors. That's kind of what movie directors do. But record producer's role isn't clear-cut at all. It depends entirely on the relationship and, the style of the producer, and then the relationship between the producer and the artist or the band. So, I think one of the best stories I ever heard about how this works was told by Billy Joel. And Billy Joel had made a few records that didn't really go anyplace. And then he hooked up with this guy named Phil Ramone. Phil Ramone was a big deal. He had produced Paul Simon and a lot of people, and he made a lot of great records. But he's producing what turned out to be Billy Joel's The Stranger album. Billy Joel shows up at the session with his band, and Phil Ramone, they say their hellos, and then Phil Ramone says to the band, why don't you run down some of the tunes? So they play the tunes, and then Phil Ramone says to the bass player,
bass player guy, I like what you're doing. It's really good. But, you know, I think if you did this, you know, maybe held that note a little longer. Okay, drummer guy, I like what you're doing, but I think you got to use more tom-toms. You got to open this up a little bit more. Give it some more space. I'm just making up the thing. But he tells each of the musicians how to tweak what they're doing, right? And Billy Joel said, and then I understood what a record producer could do for me. Because they all knew the tunes before they got into the studio. But with Phil Ramone's, with his guidance, he tweaked it and made it just more better. He made the song better than Billy, who was super talented, but better than Billy could do on his own. And it was true. He made a great record. It was a huge record, sold gazillions of records. Just as talented before he met Phil Ramone. But he needed Phil Ramone to tweak it. That's what production was. That's like one of the most concise examples of how it works. I mean, a lot of times it's way more subtle. This recording engineer, Walter Sear, who's a great engineer, great guy, who's no longer with us, he told me a great story. He said that he was watching Arif Martin produce Norah Jones' Come Away With Me album. And he said, Arif Martin would just sit in the control room and do crossword puzzles and essentially looked like he wasn't doing anything. But then the band would come in to listen to a playback, and he'd still be working on his crossword puzzle, and he would just look up every now and then at a certain part of the song and say, you know, Norah, I think if you just, he would just nudge her a little here, a little there. And then, bingo, Norah Jones has Come Away With Me. It sold like 15 million copies. Just as talented before she ever worked with Arif Martin, but Arif just knew exactly where it needed some tweaking. A little adjusting here, a little adjusting there, bingo. You know, then there are really very heavy hands-on producers like Phil Spector from the 60s. I mean, he made records with girl groups and stuff and River Deep Mountain High and everything. He had the big, massive sound. His records were really about him. You know, the artists were incidental to his records. He made the records. He made hit records. And it was about his production. You know, his records with the Ronettes, nobody knew who the Ronettes were, even practically. But a Phil Spector record had a sound, and people bought that sound. He was the star, not the performer. So it comes in all flavors. So I asked once Don Was. Now I met Don Was. I heard Don Was when he was a musician. He had a band called Was Not Was. They were kind of a funk band in the 70s and 80s. And he eventually drifted into or became a record producer. And he made some huge records. He made Bonnie Raitt's two biggest records, Nick of Time and that other one that followed it. And he's produced the Rolling Stones, and he produced Lucinda Williams, he produced Bob Dylan. He's a big shot producer. And he gave me a great observation about record producing and the art of making records. And he said, if the artist doesn't bleed a little, suffer through the session because they're putting so much into making their music great, it's probably not going to be a good record. But you know, that's almost a cliche, but I love the way he capped it off. He said, if the artist doesn't call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and wake me up and say, is this a total piece of crap? If they don't do that in some fashion, it's probably not a very good record. They're not really pouring their heart and soul into making a great record. I thought that was a great line. I'm a big fan of Loudon Wainwright, and I've interviewed him a bunch of times of various things. And he once told me he made a record with Richard Thompson, who's most famous as a guitar player, and Richard Thompson was producing him. And Loudon felt that the production on his records, the band, because Loudon's really more of a solo artist. He performs mostly alone with a guitar on stage. He doesn't usually have a band. So when he records with bands, he feels like the band is kind of pushing him, getting in the way. And Richard Thompson said, no, I'm going to let the song, these songs we're going to do, it's about the song. You know, I'm going to give space to the song. The song and you are the thing. You're in the front, the band is back there, and they're just there to support you. They're not the stars. it's the songs that are the stars on a Loudon Wainwright record. And it gave Loudon some confidence, you know, to do this. Now, I've had a long association with David Chesky, and I've been present at dozens, probably 50 Chesky sessions. And David Chesky's producing style is in that laid-back kind of category. He doesn't really tell the band what to do. He might say, you know, pick it up a little bit, or bass player's out of tune or something. But his production, he's really producing sound. Chesky records have a sound. And when he's producing, his utmost concern is making them sound his way, the way a Chesky record sounds. He's super talented musician and a great composer and a great artist in his own right, so he knows the music from the music side. But he basically wants the musicians to do it the way they want to do it. He'll nudge, he'll tuck a little here and everything, but he's pretty much hands off when it comes to the musical parts of it, of the making a Chesky record. That's the band's domain, let's say. So I've given you a bunch of examples, and it's just to say there really isn't a hard and fast way. I mean, you know, in Jeff Emmerich's book, the Beatles recording engineer, is the Beatles recording engineer for a long time, he revealed, and I knew something I didn't know about, George Martin, their producer's thing was he was helping them, he was really guiding them. And Beatles would not have gone nearly as far if they didn't have a producer as amazing and as knowledgeable as George Martin. He didn't do much in the early days of the Beatles records because they were just playing like they would play live. There wasn't a lot. They were just capturing essentially their kind of live performance in a studio. But by the time they get to, you know, Rubber Soul and Revolver, and there's more production and more sound things going on, George Martin really was amazing. And, you know, he was a classical composer, you know, engineer and producer. He knew that music. He is super deep guy when it comes to music, and he could help, you know, John and Paul counterpoint and tweak them. And Jeff Emmerich revealed in the book that sometimes after the Beatles went home, George Martin would go in and fix parts, like on a keyboard part that, let's say, John played, and John was kind of clumsy on the piano. George Martin would just go in and re-record that part and play the part himself. So he was literally hands-on on some of those early Beatles records. Now, of course, by the time the Beatles get to Sgt. Pepper, they're super famous and super powerful, and let's say their power relationship had changed, because where before George Martin was kind of their boss, now they were basically, the Beatles were George Martin's boss, and he was there to serve them. He wasn't no longer really in control. So again, these relationships between producer and artists are not locked to any real thing. Again, it's the artist and it's the producer and how they do this dance together to make a record. So I hope that helps your understanding of what exactly it is a record producer does. My name is Steve Guttenberg. I am the Audiophiliac. This is the Audiophiliac Daily Show. Comes up daily. Share it, like it, do all that social media stuff that the kids are into. And if you really, really, really like these things that I do, I would urge you to check out my Patreon page. And you can find it at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/audiophiliac. And see what you see there, and maybe you could kick in $1 or $2 a month to keep this commercial free. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you real soon. Bye.
Oh, another great one, Steve.
Steve was here.
At Steve Guttenberg, Audiophiliac on YouTube, and same with patreon.com/audiophiliac.
Yep. A good look there.
Definitely a record connoisseur. Did you see that record collection behind him?
Yes, I did. Good stuff over there for sure.
It looked concise.
Yep, some good stuff.
Now he did bring up a good point that like there are at least two different types of producers that you might deal with. Ones who are like the Rick Rubins that like it's all about their sound and they're trying to make those artists and bands sound their way. Kramer's another good example with that. And then you have those producers who are more hands off and they're more like the arrangers. They look for the parts that need a little bit of nudging or fixing, and they do what they need to do from the back.
Yep.
A good producer should recognize what they're dealing with and the artist they're dealing with and whether the material needs that high level Rick Rubin sound or just needs a little massage here, like, hey, why don't you kick into the verse a little earlier?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And sometimes it's even, just about the sound itself, a little EQ tweak or a little this or a little that, those kinds of things can just make a whole big difference in the way the whole project comes across.
Yeah, that's another thing that producers are also sometimes like hand in hand with the engineers, or they are the engineers.
Right. Exactly. Being able to have, both hats on at the same time.
Yeah, well, no matter what, the producer has to understand that hat, even if they're not the one doing it. Even if they do have a sound guy, they need to tell that sound guy what they're looking for, just like the band does.
Right. Or they have a sound guy that has the latitude and knows he has the latitude to, he knows to tweak this and tweak that. And then, in the booth, they give them, they like what they hear. So they're, they know what's going on down there, but they can add, hey, I want to hear more of this, less of that, those sorts of things. But usually, those individual tweaks, like we're doing that, in the booth or between the instruments and the final, the final thing going out.
Yeah. When it's done right, the whole workflow just flows.
Yeah. Exactly. And like you said, the person who's just sitting there and looks like they're not doing anything, but at the right time, they say, hey, we just need a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that. Like those little tweaks are hugely important to, to the commercial value of things, like what they're talking about there for sure.
Well, that if that producer's got their eye on the ball, they know, what the radios or the record sales they know what they're expecting. And that part of the recipe, sometimes they're the ones most aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Band might want to make a 15-minute song, but smart producer tells them, how about a 7-minute?
Cut it down to 305. Make it radio friendly.
Yeah. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, exactly. Or one of my favorites, Adam Hart Mother from Pink Floyd, 23 minutes.
Pink Floyd can get away with it.
They're allowed. And now, how about the kind of going back to before, like producer versus engineer versus exec producer, right?
Yes. Now we're getting to the back end of like, the song process. And after all the different skills we've looked at, like when the music's done or the music's getting finalized, this is where we're talking engineers, producers, sometimes some of those musicians wearing hats on the back end to master and get things ready for distribution. And this comes from the CEO of Discmaker. He's actually got a multi-part series. We're going to look at the first part, which covers the producer versus engineer versus executive producer. And this one does come from Discmaker's official site over at YouTube at Discmakers. And any old schoolers out there, like this was the distro for the longest time. I mean, now you got DistroKid and these other choices, but these guys kind of set the standard, especially back in the CD days.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, and this one again is producer versus engineer versus executive producer. What's the difference?
My name is Tony Van Veen, CEO of Discmakers. As a musician, you've probably heard talk of producer points, something along the line of, as a producer, I want 4 points on that recording. Have you ever wondered, what does that even mean, and how does that work? Well, over the next 3 weeks starting today, I will be diving into that question. I'll explain what points are, how they work, when a producer should get points and whether and when a producer may also be entitled to a songwriter split of your song that they just produced. Today, however, I'm going to start with a basic question. What is actually the difference between a recording engineer and a producer, and where does the executive producer come into the picture? Now, my personal experience might not be too different from what you experienced as an independent artist. You see, way back in the day, when I went into the studio with my band, we had our songs, we liked them, we were broke, and we were ignorant. And so the studio came with an engineer, and the engineer ended up recording our album and mixing it. And we took that mix, that master, and we sent it to a pressing plant, and we got our records pressed. And it was fine, but it may not have led to the best sounding album possible. You see, we couldn't afford a producer, and frankly, the thought of a producer never even really crossed our mind. So what's the difference between an engineer and a producer, you ask? Well, the main difference is that while both the producer and the engineer have a healthy understanding of the technical aspects of music production, producers also have an added level of artistic and creative vision to make a recording the best it can be. As such, while many music producers are also good sound engineers don't necessarily make the best producers. Your recording engineer is a technician. They set up the studio and the recording equipment, they operate the soundboard, they operate other equipment during the recording sessions. If you have a producer, the engineer works under the supervision of that producer. Their main job is to use their technical skills to make sure that the producers and the artist's vision come to fruition. They're also often responsible for mixing the recorded tracks. A producer really is the creative leader of a recording session or an album. He or she, but for better or worse in this business, usually he, is in charge of the overall recording, of the sound, of the vibe. And as such, the producer may actually completely rearrange some songs. They'll coach musicians on how to play on a track. They'll help artists pick which songs to put on the album. They'll sometimes mix the recordings, not always. Sometimes the engineer does that. They'll decide the sequence of the album tracks. Maybe they'll even play an instrument or contribute sounds to a recording. In fact, depending on the genre, producers may do less or more. In hip hop, the producer may, create the beat, or in many cases, create the complete musical track that the artist will be rapping over. Heck, if you're somebody like Rick Rubin, a producer may even play psychologist with the band members during the recording session. In short, the producer is a super important creative contributor to the end recording. So what does an exec producer do then? Well, in my experience, while the executive producer can sometimes perform some of the producer functions, they usually have more of a financial and administrative role. They'll oversee the recording budget, they'll hire session players, they'll secure funding for the recording. In other words, on most indie recordings, when you see the credit for exec producer, it's probably the person who paid for the project. So there you have it. Hopefully I've clarified the difference between an engineer, producer, and an exec producer. In my next video, I'll be discussing whether and when your producer deserves points, what that means, how it works, and how many they may be entitled to, and also how that translates into dollars. See you then.
All right, Tony. That did clear some things up for me, and it actually reinforced what I already suspected, which, the engineer does take its lead from the producer, and the executive producers are usually the financiers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They might have some say because they're throwing the dollars at you, but they tend to trust the producer to be kind of the conductor at this point in the finalizing.
And in the previous video, they were also mentioning the power dynamic, where in the beginning the band was coming in and kind of happy to be able to work with the producer and whatever, and then later on, like now they're the boss essentially, because they're the power dynamic shifted because they became so famous. Now they have a lot more say in what's going on, so they become more, whether it's the executive producer side or more the decision makers, and the people before were who were making those decisions in the past now are more following the direction of the band, because the band probably has a better idea of how to do that as well. Like now that they are more familiar, as they start out, they don't necessarily have the skills or the knowledge to or the equipment to get things done, but as they become famous, they all of a sudden have home studios and they're all doing their own thing as well. So now they're all each of them is now a mixer and a master and a producer on their own.
Oh, and you can look back at it through like band histories where they started with a certain producer for their first album or first couple of albums and changed producers either because they wanted a different sound or they weren't happy with the sound they were getting or the production from the record company, or sometimes they even changed record companies themselves.
Yep.
There's a lot of producer horror stories, especially through the 80s and 90s, as people were starting to build their own home studios and take control into their own hands.
Now I know we're running a little bit over, but I think we have time for one more.
Oh, and it's a good one. It's from a good channel, Tatro.
Nice.
Yeah, Tatro is a very cool channel across the board. Anything you're into, he's another one of those music enthusiasts that covers it all.
Nice.
Yeah, and he's at Tatro over on YouTube. Got an Instagram.
And this one's about advice for beginner music producers.
Yeah, if you're just starting out.
The number one question I get asked, and I don't really know how to answer, or I didn't really know how to answer until right now, is what is your advice for beginner music producers? People just starting out. What is your advice? The reason I say I didn't really have a good answer for this is because I'm kind of baffled by that question. So hopefully you all will watch this video and let me know if my answer makes sense. And if you are yourself a beginner music producer, somebody who's just starting out, I think this will be a really important video for you. In fact, even if you're somebody who's been in it for a little while, but you're still having struggles, I also think this will be a good video for you. All right, so my DMs, my stream chat sometimes get flooded with very, very basic questions. And I'm not talking about the question from the top of the video. I'm talking about questions like, what DAW do you use? What speakers are those? What plugin is that? What headphones do you use? And at some level, those are valid, but on another level, I want to tell you all to stop asking those questions. And not in a rude, like, I don't want to answer your messages kind of way, in the way that specifically relates to my answer to this question, what is your best advice for beginners? And here it is. Everything that I've pretty much done in the past 5 years when it comes to music production, anything that I do on this channel, it's all open source. You want to know what program I use, what plugin I used, even what video production stuff I use. You can find it either in a video or in the description of a video, on my Instagram, on my Twitter, all of the above. All the information is out there. So what beginners need to do, the number one piece of advice, I could say, it's not technical. It has nothing to do with what program you use. It has nothing to do with what gear you get. It has nothing to do with what your social media strategy should be. It has to do with how you solve problems, and how you overcome hurdles, and how you answer every single question that pops up into your brain on your own. This is the number one thing you can learn to progress 1,000 times faster than you will if you are taking those questions out to other people constantly. Now, there's of course a time and a place for this. Pretty much every stream that I do, I say, I'll answer questions along the way. Common questions always come up. Every time I open Splice, people ask, what is that? And I'll answer,
splice. And that's great, and that's why I like streaming, because in real time I can just like quickly rattle off the answer to those questions. But say you're not in the live chat, say you're just wanting to make a similar kind of music that I make, and you come across a video and you see me open this program that has all these samples in it, and I'm just quickly downloading them and dropping it into my DAW. Leaving a comment that I might not see, or sending me a DM that I might not see, is not the fastest way to get the answer to your question. DMing creators and leaving comments is almost never the quickest way to get the answer to your question. You might get lucky and have somebody see your public comment and answer for the creator. That's great. You might get extra lucky, and I do answer comments occasionally, and I'll leave an answer myself, or the creator themselves will leave an answer. But it's not 100% reliable. You don't know if you're going to get the answer. And what are you doing in the time between when you asked the question, and let's say it's a day later, when you get the answer to that question? Take the rest of the day off? What if it's not a week until you get the answer? You just like have that question unanswered for a week? No. Instead, what you need to do is literally become an expert Googler. This has not only helped me progress as an artist, but it's also like literally gotten me work. When people come and say we want to do X, Y, Z, I might know how to do X, but not Y and Z, but I certainly know how to Google how to do Y and Z. So when you're a beginner, you're producing music, you've maybe bought a MIDI controller, you maybe downloaded a program. What you need to do is start creating until you hit a wall. Until you're like, I don't know how to make that sound from that song that I really like. And instead of messaging the producer, literally typing into Google how to make lead sound from song XYZ. If you're lucky, you'll find a specific tutorial on how to make sounds that artist often uses. If you're not super lucky, you won't have a lot of luck. And that's where the expert Googler skill comes into play. Because now you want to search for things that are semi-related to that. Maybe that one producer you're looking to emulate the sound of is kind of obscure, and there's not a lot of resources on how to make their sound. But maybe there's this other, more mainstream producer that has a similar kind of sound, and you can kind of find how to get close via that. And it's not just like about sound design either. My MIDI controller is delayed when I push a button. There's too much delay. Okay, you type that into Google, and suddenly, hopefully you find the answer. But delay is not quite the right term. Latency is. It's all about understanding that you don't necessarily know the terminology as a beginner, but you can still attempt to ask those questions. And when you start to see results and answers that are close to what you want, but aren't exactly what you want, you just keep reading and looking for context and try to figure out how to ask the better question that's gonna get you the actual answer. Doing this and being self-sufficient and independent in answering your own questions is absolutely life-changing. And I would highly, highly recommend that you just don't comment these questions or DM creators for the answers, because it's going to waste you time. Not because it's not worth the creator's time, not because they might not take the time to answer you, but because it wastes your time when you could be solving that question probably in 30 minutes tops, maybe if you're good, if you're lucky, and then move on and start going until you run into the next wall. And suddenly in that research that you just did, you learned a few other terms that are going to help you search for the answer to the question to the next wall that you run into. And it's constant. I hit walls still all the time, no matter how long I've been doing this. I hit technical walls all the time. And then there's one other part of this that I want to talk about, which doesn't really have to do with Googling, but it has to do with you inferring things rather than feeling the need to have everything explicitly stated to you. What I mean by this is I have a lot of videos about like the Launch Key Mini or the Akai MPK Mini. And what sometimes can happen is people get really specific with their questions. How do I do this on the Akai MPK Mini? When meanwhile, I actually have a tutorial doing the same technique, and it actually doesn't matter what MIDI controller you used. I was actually doing it on the Launch Key. But the answer to your question is in that video with the Launch Key. You're just being too specific about your question and really narrowing the amount of results and information that you're taking in. Not every piece of content has to be made to specifically answer your question for you to find the answer within that content. And a great example of this, I cannot recommend this enough. Every single interview with music producers that you see. Like there's tons of Phineas interviews, all of those Genius, Behind the Beat, or whatever they call that series. I might not want to make the specific kind of music that those producers make, but I know when I watch those videos, I am going to learn so much. Even if I didn't have a specific question going into the video, it might solve an issue just by watching it that I had months ago and forgot about. And I might learn something that because I didn't know I had the question, I would have never found the answer to. By just like being a sponge and absorbing all the things that these producers with great success are doing. And that is also not just about watching the video, listening to what they say in the interview, or listening to what they say in a podcast. It's about like you're watching a video of somebody work in Ableton Live, and something they don't even mention is on their screen in Ableton Live, and you're pausing and you're figuring out what's the name of that plugin, zooming in on it, trying to just like decipher everything that's going on in the background, and then going down that rabbit hole, Googling that plugin, seeing what it does, and then watching that video back again and seeing how the producer was using it, seeing how it was affecting the sound, even though they might not have even talked about it. So I hope this is all making sense, and I hope this is some value, but I really do think this is my number one advice for beginner music producers. Be independent, be self-reliant. Of course, there are times to reach out and ask for help, but also ask yourself, can I solve this? Can I figure out the answer to this on my own? And if you can, that's 100 times better than having to go out and get the answer. I hope this video was helpful. That is my number one advice for beginner music producers. If you think it's good advice, let me know in a comment. If you think there's better advice for beginner music producers, let me know that in a comment too. Leave a like on this video on your way out. This channel is made possible by channel members, so if you're able to click the join button down below, you can become a part of our amazing Discord server. You can get free samples. It's a really great community we have over there, and you can submit music to our track review streams. So consider clicking the join button, but of course, just subscribing with notifications on and throwing a like completely for free is a way to support this channel at no cost to you. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Tatro. Have a good one.
Yeah, Tatro kicks ass.
Yeah.
And tell me, Glenn, like everything he was saying from the first advice to the last, I was like, this could be Glenn saying it.
Yep.
I've heard you say these things to people.
Yep. Troubleshooting and figuring out, even just understanding the problem and understanding how to search the Google stuff specifically. I mean, being an expert Googler is an awesome skill that everybody should have. And it's something that everyone should investigate everything. Yeah.
Now it's starting to apply with being an expert prompter for AI. So
exactly.
you know, learning how to search for your answers to your questions, asking the right way. Don't ask for delay, ask for latency.
Yep.
Once you realize what you need to ask for, the answers come quicker.
Exactly. And, and also realize that so many other people have had the same problem that you're having, whatever kind of problem it is, you're not unique in that problem. There's, so many other people have had the same problem with the same gear or similar problems, trying to see the trends and how they fit together and, predict where the problems could be. But the main thing is being able to identify and close in on, good resources to fix your problems.
And others that have had it and how they've dealt with it. Like Ange actually just brought in a good one in the chat while we were watching that. Apparently on the mobile side right now, headphones and microphones are acting a little weird. And if any of you are experiencing that, let us know. We're hearing it from a couple of users. They might have put an update on the mobile app that wasn't fully baked yet.
Yep. And we appreciate you coming out, Grace, and everybody else for coming out and hanging out with us and checking out all this good info.
Yes, we learned what we are tonight.
Exactly.
And it turns out some of us are all of these things: arrangers, composers, writers, producers.
but just seeing like little windows into each of them to see which aspects are either things that you're already doing or things that you want to do or things that you want to learn more about. All of those are good.
Oh, oh, there we go. I want the full Glenn.
There he is. And it is after pumpkin time. So, I mean, it is a little bit late. So we're going to have to call it at this point. But we've had lots of good stuff to go over, new channels for everybody to check out. And we'll find more new channels for next time. I mean, we generally are able to find new stuff every week, but we always find good stuff to check out to, check different subjects and get music.
Well, and if any of you have ideas on a topic or a theme that you'd like to see, fire them at us.
Yep, absolutely. We appreciate y'all coming out.
I'm willing to go look at any rabbit hole if it's musical.
That's right. And we always appreciate everybody coming out for talking IT with Glenn and Tony. Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.